Destined to Destruct. Darkness Prevails. Book 1. By Sierra Graves. Chapter 1. Iona. The muttering of disgruntled voices settled as King Jarek entered the room. I was right behind him, my eyes taking in every face seated at the long, rectangular table in the council chamber. I knew them all. It was my job to know every Phi who interacted with King Jarek. As his head bodyguard, his life was always in my hands no matter what he might believe. King Jarek, dressed in black leather pants, knee-high black boots, red shirt with a black red embroidered vest over it, drew back the tall back chair at the head of the table. The soft glow from the 4 small lamps running down the length of the table lit his face, showcasing his dark red beard. I squared my shoulders as I stood at the wall behind Jarek and watched, hands clasped behind my back. Henson, my second, stood on Jarek's other side, also with his back to the wall. He, at least, wasn't as ridiculed as I was for protecting the king's life. He was full Phi. I wasn't, and the advisors, as well as the king's sister, Princess Mariana, made certain to remind me of that fact whenever they could. Even now, the spoiled woman with shimmering red hair glared at me pointedly, her long manicured nails tapping on the table. My face remained carefully blank. Jarek cleared his throat, and Mariana finally looked away. I would like to call to order this meeting on the 5th of October, Jarek spoke in a deep voice. All are present, and as such I find it's high time we discuss the proposals I sent out to all of you over 2 months ago. He leaned back in his chair. I didn't have to look to know he had one brow arched, as he gave his advisors an annoyed look. They would never have dared to keep his parents waiting for answers. Then again, Jarek was unlike any King Charus had seen in several hundred years. Well? Your Majesty, Crane started, and my fingers twitched. His thinning white hair was brushed back, as if that would help hide the fact it was falling out. Of course, he'd be the first to open his mouth. The others probably told him he had to. We have read through the proposals, but I must be the first to say I think you're being rash. Rash? Jarek repeated quietly. Explain. The Dark Phi kingdoms have been doing things this way for centuries. Jolian still has policies in place that your parents abolished decades ago. That was hard enough for the people to accept. To change the rest of our laws in one fell swoop won't make you very popular with your subjects. Not much I do these days seems to, according to you, Jarek replied. I heard the smirk in his words. If we were alone, I would have smacked him upside the head. All his mocking would get him in trouble one day, but did he ever listen to me? Nope, never. What do you expect when you force these changes on our people? Mariana snapped, as she flipped a lock of hair over her shoulder. She shot me another intense look, until Jarek coughed loudly. Already there are rumors you are not a suitable king. And you know who's spreading these rumors? She clenched her jaw. No, but they are out there, Jarek, and that's the reality. Brother, see reason. There is nothing wrong with how we currently rule. The humans will remain oblivious, as long as we keep bribing the right officials. There's no reason to change anything. If you ask me. Which I haven't, Jarek cut her off. She scoffed. You should be focusing on more important matters, like forming a more secure alliance with the other Dark Phi kingdom. For what purpose? You complain to me about focusing on the wrong issue and change, but we have always stood on our own. Not like we're about to go to war, Mariana. Iona, Jarek called me loudly. I stepped forward. Do you have any reports of an enemy marching through our territory? No, Your Grace. Any hint of an enemy on our borders? None, Your Grace, I replied. Any chance at all, in the next 72 hours we're going to be at war? Unless Princess Mariana has the gift of foresight all of a sudden, and knows something I don't know, Your Grace. None. She glowered at me, flattening her hands on the table as if she was fighting the urge to jump over it and strangle me. Wouldn't be the first time. You see? Jarek lifted his hand, and I returned to my place against the wall. It's 2019, Mariana. For too damned long, we've treated all those under our care unequally. The goblins are Fi at the end of the day, and it's about damn time we treat them as such. You sure this has nothing to do with your head bodyguard? Devon, another advisor, spoke out. He was so old, no one could remember his age. I kept waiting for the day he keeled over during one of these meetings. The old man clung to life somehow. It was obnoxious. I stiffened slightly at Devon's words, but otherwise made no indication they bothered me. I was used to it, after all this time. It has to do with her, and every other half-goblin and full-blooded goblin in all reaches of my kingdom. Others have made changes across the pond. I think it's our turn. The Light Fi kingdoms made changes eons ago, and they couldn't be happier. I mentally rolled my eyes. I was pretty certain nothing could dampen the Light Fi spirits. They were always a bit giddy. No matter what Jarek's damned sister and his advisors might think, he'd been fighting for goblins' rights since before I ever entered his life. It might be the 21st century, but goblins were treated as second-class citizens. They had been, since the uprising over 150 years ago. Goblins grew tired of being pushed around by the Dark Fi, so they rebelled. The battle was bloody, but only lasted 3 days. Goblin numbers were decimated, and the Dark Fi ensured we would never have the strength to rise again. I was one of many half-bloods that were seen as a freak of nature. The fact that I was the king's head bodyguard was a cause for concern among the advisors. I couldn't count the number of times Jarek had to remind them I saved his life while nearly losing my own. Not that it mattered. I could be the perfect guard, and they'd still only see the goblin bits of me. Instinctively, I curled my tiny black claws tighter into my hands to tuck them completely out of sight. Since it appears you have not taken my proposal seriously, I'm moving forward with several of them in the coming month. With or without your support, Jarek went on, and there was an immediate uproar. I tensed, making ready to grab Jarek and drag him out of the line of fire. He held up his hand, and the displeased voices quieted. My hand stayed on the hilt of my dagger, all the same, eyeing every single person in that room, daring them to make a move. I urge you all to step into the future with me, before we're the ones left behind. We will do so, Lillian, another advisor, said as she bowed. She was usually more level-headed, but her dark violet eyes always made me believe she was up to something. She was too perfect some days. But there is another important matter we wish to discuss with you again, King Jarek. He waved for her to go on, though I sensed I already knew what that matter was. You are nearing the age of 30 in 5 years, and are currently without a wife and therefore without an heir. This is, I'm afraid to say, unacceptable. Now, there is Princess Kara from the Light Fi Kingdom of Honeysuckle or Princess Willow from the Light Fi Kingdom of Briar. Beside me, Henson smirked until I subtly nudged him with the toe of my boot. The Dark Fi were more down-to-earth. The Light Fi tended to be very peace-loving and over-the-top in their joy. Not that there was anything wrong with being happy all the time, but it got on my nerves after a while. I hated when Jarek visited those kingdoms. They were too bright and cheery. I quickly looked to Jarek, and though he wasn't smiling, there was a hint of amusement in his dark green eyes. With all due respect, Lillian, I've taken the matter very seriously and have the perfect woman in mind to become my queen, Jarek told her. Who? Lillian pressed on. I mean, who is it you wish to make your bride, Highness? Such a woman is normally presented to the council before this magnitude of an important decision is made. Jarek tilted his head at her, and I will when the time comes, but there is no question of this woman's undying loyalty to the kingdom. Trust me, you have nothing to worry about. Now shall we deal with these other matters so we can all get on with our day? Jarek shuffled through the official documents for trade, finances and incidents involving Fi and humans. Those were pretty rare. We were good at keeping our existence a secret. Jarek's kingdom spread from the heart of Montana up through Canada, all the way to the west coast and south to Colorado. Thankfully, California was not in his territory. That was ruled by one of the Light Fi kingdoms. We had several towns that were solely Fi. If humans came too close, our magic kicked in, and they were sent on their way, forgetting why they'd been headed that direction. The capital of Charuz, Jarek's kingdom, was set on a massive 1,000-acre property. The closest town was Al Fi. Most of the farms were run by goblins, used for various magical ingredients the Fi needed in their day-to-day lives. Goblins were the real heartbeat of this kingdom, and only Jarek was willing to admit it and do something to make their lives better. I took another glance around the room as the various heads of branches gave their reports to Jarek. When I reached Mariana, I held the glare she was giving me. Unlike her brother, she was selfish, hateful, and she despised goblins. She was damned cunning too, and had a network of spies that rivaled my own. I didn't back down, and internally I smirked when she finally looked away. I'd told Jarek before that his sister was going to be a problem. He said we'd deal with her when the time came. If he made the announcement he intended to make, she would be the one to act, and then it might be too late. I escorted Jarek to his private study down the hall from the council chamber on the second floor. His bedroom was at the opposite end of this corridor. Henson stayed outside the door in the hall as I followed Jarek in and closed the door. He walked around the ornate, hand-carved wooden desk and dropped the stack of papers in his arms. "All right, let's hear it," he said as he sat down. He unbuttoned his black vest and draped it over the back of the chair. I stood in the center of the room, hands still clasped behind my back. "I'm afraid I don't understand, Your Grace." "Iona, your lips been twitching since we exited the council chamber," he pointed out with a smirk. "Something's on your mind and drop the title shit. We're alone, remember? I don't think that's a good idea. Especially now, Your Grace." He sighed heavily and pushed back from his desk. "There's no one else in this room but us. Henson is the only guard outside the door." He spread his arms wide to encompass the windows. "No one can see or get to me from outside unless they can fly. Will you relax, please? Unless someone appears out of thin air, my life is not currently in danger." My shoulders sagged as I let my hands relax. "You're an idiot." He laughed as he reached me. "Wow, why not just tell me how you really feel?" "I plan to. Do you have any idea what you're doing to yourself? Ever since you started this campaign for the goblins, we've been dealing with an increase in threats against your life and the rise of even more extremists. I don't exactly enjoy taking down assassins trying to kill you in broad daylight." "That was one time." "3 times, I corrected hotly. He tilted his head back and forth, then finally shook it as he went to the side table and poured 2 glasses full of dark red wine. "And?" I sputtered as he walked back, giving me his most charming grin. I hated to admit it was working. "Stop that." "Why?" "You know how much you love it." He offered me one of the glasses, but I didn't take it. "I'm not off duty, Jarek. That's something that will change once it's all official." "You can't," I argued, and he threw his head back on a grunt. "You know you can't, not until you settle all this crap with the goblin rights. Which is something I think you should be more excited about." "Oh, I am. I'm thrilled," I muttered sarcastically as he plopped down on the black love seat by the stone and wooden hearth. "I love hearing about how many people want to kill you for your throne." "Jarek," I pleaded, "if you tell them about your future wife, I'm not sure I'll be able to protect you." "Ah, but you see, once you are my future wife you won't have to. That'll fall to Henson, poor guy." As I blew out an aggravated breath, I rubbed my forehead and turned away from him. "They'll never accept me as your wife. You and I both know that," I whispered. "You need to find someone else or no one." "Yeah, I like that option. I'd prefer not to have to guard some stupid light-fi bimbo." His deep-throated laughter sent a familiar warmth rushing through me. I heard the clink of glass, and sensed him behind me even before he rested his hands on my shoulders and turned me around. Jarek stood a good 10 inches over me, but it never seemed like he was looking down on me, like so many other Fi. His fingers ran through my hair I hadn't pulled into a bun today. "You really think I could be with someone else?" he asked quietly. "I know you are a good king, and a good king does what's best for his people. If that means marrying someone else, someone better than..." He cut me off with a kiss, running his thumb over the pale scar that ran along my jaw. His eyes lightened, as they always did when he remembered that day. I'd only been a bodyguard then, not the head bodyguard. His motorcade had been attacked by extremists. The 2 front cars had been blown up. The SUV he'd been in barely missed the 3rd bomb. I'd been in the last car. As we'd run out to protect Jarek, we'd been picked off by gunfire. I'd saved his life, kept him alive until backup arrived. It was a damned miracle we survived that day. You are who I want, Iona, and you are going to be my wife, unless you've changed your mind about your feelings for me. I shook my head as I tugged at his beard. Never. Good, then it's settled. I bit my lower lip. Stop worrying so much. Going to give yourself wrinkles. I already have gray hairs because of you. His smile faltered. How bad have the threats been? Honest. How about you worry about your advisors, and I'll worry about keeping you alive until these changes are made. It's my duty after all. He traced his fingers over the tattoos on my forearms. The right was marked with a sword entwined with fire, to show I belonged to the Fighters Guild, along with which element I'd chosen. My left bore the markings of my rank as assassin and bodyguard. There were 5 skulls in a long line, each bearing a small crescent moon on its forehead. He ran his thumb across the light green tattoo on my forehead. A circled 5-point star flanked by 3 dots on each side. You must be one of the youngest to have the highest rank, he mused. I'm honored you're choosing me to be your husband. You sure about that? Yeah, as long as I don't piss you off, we'll live happily ever after, he said as he grinned. Gods, you're beautiful. He leaned in for another kiss, and I gave in. Henson was outside the door. He was the only one who officially knew about Jarek and me. He swore loyalty to us both, so I never worried about him giving us away. Mariana had her suspicions, as did a few others, but there was no proof. We'd been careful over the last year, very careful. The others might not take me seriously because of my goblin blood, but they should. I might be short, but I was stronger than most because of my mixed blood. When Jarek had first invited me to dine with him after the accident, I never expected we'd be where we were now. No other Phi had found me attractive, with my strange ivory gray complexion, or my ears that were far more pointed than a normal Phi's. My pitch black eyes. Or my long straight white blonde hair. Many feared the tiny claws that I had in place of fingernails. Not Jarek. From that night on, we found a friendship that grew into something more. Something damned dangerous. He might be able to relax, but I'd never be able to. Not until his sister was put in her place, and the last of the extremists were dead in the ground. Until then, Jarek's life would always be under threat. And I'd do everything I could to keep him alive.
Chapter 2. Aiden. The brakes on the old rundown red pickup gave my arrival away. Kids ran out of their homes and surrounded the truck as I grabbed my medicine bag and climbed out. Aiden. A little goblin girl leaped at me, and I caught her with one arm as I laughed. I swear you've grown another foot, I exclaimed as she beamed up at me with eyes so dark they were basically black. The pockmarks on her face were gone, which was good. I'd been busy dealing with a breakout in another small goblin community, and hadn't a chance to get back here as soon as I would have liked. I was used to this treatment from her and the other kids. This tiny settlement was one of the many I visited in Montana. I was one of the few Dark Phi healers who cared enough to take care of them. King Jarek kept making promises that he was taking the plight of the goblins seriously, but from what I'd heard, his advisors were continuously finding ways to stop his progress. So far, all he managed to do was make the Phi who hated their goblin brethren hate them more. Several small communities had been vandalized, with a group of Phi going so far as to kidnap a goblin man. His beaten body had been found 2 days later in the middle of the road. He hadn't made it. I set the little girl, Felicity, back on her bare feet and patted each kid's head in turn. Mostly, I was checking for any signs of the gobpox, as the Phi called it. Really, it was a deadlier version of what the humans called chickenpox. A few of the other kids showed signs of it on their gray-toned faces. I made a note to give them all another dose of the vaccine, and to leave a supply of ointments and tonics to help combat the fevers. Goblin fevers were the worst. They rampaged through the body, and if they weren't caught fast enough, the goblin would die within days. Lately, there'd been some new illnesses cropping up throughout Charuz and Jolien. The other healers and I had never seen them before. I'd hoped all this community would have to deal with was gobpox, but even that had me on edge. I'd almost been too late with Felicity. I had been too late with countless others. Their deaths weighed on me and made me furious all over again that our nobility hadn't done anything. Aiden, an older goblin woman with white hair that was pulled back in a long braid, bustled forward. She wiped her hands on her blue apron, then hugged me fiercely. I kissed her cheek and she blushed. Matilda. Sorry it's taken me so long to get back here. Oh, we know Timber Falls isn't the only community you take care of. You're running yourself ragged. She patted my cheek hard, those smaller black eyes studying every inch of my face. Have you been eating and sleeping? You look like shit. Never one to mince words, are you? What? You're a handsome fi who needs to find himself a woman at some point. I laughed as she took my medicine bag and followed me to the bed of the truck. I've been quite fine on my own without a woman. Too much drama. Is that so? Matilda asked with a crooked grin. I know several here who would argue with you. Especially Teresa. She's been asking about you. Teresa was tall for a full-blooded goblin, with a breathtaking smile and a kind heart. But I'd known her since we were kids and always thought of her as a sister instead of someone I'd ever get involved with. As much as Matilda repeatedly tried to set us up, Teresa felt the same. Last I heard, she had her sights set on Henry, another goblin here in Timber Falls. He had one of the better farms around. I told Teresa last time I passed through, she should just tell the damned goblin how she felt. If Matilda was trying to hook us up again, I guess Teresa hadn't yet. I'd have to talk to her about waiting too long. I lowered the tailgate and climbed up. I'm sure she has, I told Matilda, but as I said, I'm doing just fine on my own. Not like I'm home that much anyway. What kind of relationship would that be, except a bad one? As Matilda barked a laugh, I rolled up the sleeves on my red plaid flannel shirt, then set to work unloading the supplies I brought. I had crates of dried goods, herbs, replacement blades for some of the farming equipment, and whatever else had been on the list of items Timber Falls was in short supply of. The kingdom of Charuz might be doing well overall, but the goblin communities hardly ever saw any of the benefits. They had to hand over 80% of the crops they grew, as well as the livestock and whatever goods they produced. It left very little for them, and they were hardly paid what they should be. There were other healers in my guild who also traveled around Charuz, doing what we could to help. Never felt like enough. I always thanked the gods I wasn't in Jolien. The hardships for the goblins there were almost too much to bear listening to. By the time everything was unloaded, I was shedding the flannel shirt and tossing it over the side of the truck. I shoved my shoulder-length hair out of my face, then hopped off the tailgate. Matilda stood to the side, talking with Teresa and the community elder, Orion. He was Teresa's uncle, and essentially her dad. Her parents were killed in a farming accident when she was 4. He was also one of the many regular patients I tended to, suffering from a decades-old fight with bad lungs. The tonic I brought him once a month was the only thing that seemed to help him breathe regularly. Good to see you again, lad, Orion said as I walked toward him and shook his wrinkled hand. And you, sir, I replied. I brought as much as I could. Anything you bring is always more than enough, he assured me. Come, why don't we talk for a few moments while the others take care of the supplies? Matilda will take your medicine bag to the clinic for you. I agreed and we set off, Teresa holding her uncle's arm as we walked. She smiled at me, but her gaze was filled with worry when it shifted back to Orion. You really should be resting, she told him. Ah, You young people are always worrying about everything. I'm fine. Teresa's lips thinned, and she shot me a look behind his back. I tried to give her one back that said I'd take care of him. He didn't sound as bad as he usually did, but if she was helping him walk, then he wasn't as strong as he should have been. What is it you wanted to talk to me about? I asked him as we strolled through the tiny community of Timber Falls. The houses were all modest stone or wood cabins. The town structures were also wood, and nothing was taller than 2 stories. Most faces were smiling when we passed, but there was an air of exhaustion too. And fear. I'd sensed it at the other places I'd visited this past month. We reached the edge of the large pasture where a herd of cattle grazed. There are rumors of a rebellion reaching us, Orion said quietly. I rested a hand on the nearest wood post. I know. I've heard the same mutterings. I don't think it's going to happen. That's not what the others are saying. Others? What others? A few weeks ago, a group of goblins passed through. One's from further north, Teresa explained. They said they were joining up with other goblins, who were preparing to take a petition before King Jarek. Just a petition. Teresa's frown deepened. That's what they said, but I overheard them talking about gathering weapons and trying to decide when the king would be most vulnerable. I think they're planning to assassinate him. Or his sister. Hell, they might be after all the nobles. They'll fail, I said flatly. Orion nodded as he added, and the moment they do, we're going to be in danger. All of us. Aiden, I know you don't have any influence with the king, but if your guild master or if there's anyone else you can trust does, I want you to pass along what we know. You want me to tell them the goblins are plotting against the throne? I asked, alarmed. The second they raise their hands in violence, we're doomed. But if we can stop them, there's a chance we can prevent the bloodshed that would surely come. I rubbed a hand down my face as I watched the grazing cows. Why couldn't life be simple? The goblins had done all that was asked of them since the end of the first rebellion. King Jarek was attempting to make their lives better, and now these idiots were going to ensure their people would never have equal rights. Instead, they turned the goblins into slaves, or worse. Lives would be lost, so many lives. I'm sorry, I told Orion. I don't think I can do anything. I don't know anyone with enough influence to make a difference. If the wrong person finds out, it'll just make matters worse. And what happens when they follow through with their plan? He argued, not angry but firm. Aiden, I won't watch my people suffer because of the actions of a few. I'm just a healer. That's it. He smiled softly. You and I both know you are far more than that. He patted my shoulder. If you change your mind and find someone you can trust, I urge you to tell them before it's too late. King Jarek wants to better us all. I believe in him, but not all goblins are so trusting of the throne. They had a reason not to be. It was no secret there were some nobles who took sport in killing goblins. They'd come up with whatever reason they had to, so they wouldn't be punished for their crimes. It was sick. Aside from King Jarek, there were other nobles who supported his changes, but too many others were against them. The other Dark Fae kingdom of Jolian treated its goblins worse than the Fae here. They'd never side with King Jarek. Aside from the constant rumors of another goblin rebellion, there were extremists talking about taking down the throne. A civil war wasn't out of the question. Many Fae voiced their preference for Mariana over Jarek. I have kept you too long, Orion said suddenly. We can speak more of this later. We will be talking later, Teresa whispered to me as she passed, letting Orion walk ahead of her. I'm worried about his health. He's getting worse. I wondered as much. I'll find you later. And Aiden, she said, tapping my cheek as she'd done since we were kids, welcome back. It's good to see you. I kissed her cheek. You too. I'll be around. Just come find me. I'd already been stressed after leaving the goblin town 50 miles south of here. We were closer to the heart of Charus, but far enough from any nobles to deal with too much trouble. It was rare for any of them to show their faces here. These people were able to enjoy a mostly peaceful life. But being so close to the capital meant, if there ever was trouble, Timber Falls would be the first community the soldiers would come to. Orion's best bet would be to track down these goblins, figure out their plan, and convince them it wasn't going to work. The five were too strong. Jarek, as much as I didn't necessarily like him, was trying his best. He simply needed more time. Anything the goblins did now could put all he worked toward in jeopardy. As I walked toward the clinic and where I'd be sleeping for as long as I was here, I tried to put a smile on my face. I'd worry about a possible rebellion later. When the last goblin left the clinic, thanking me profusely for the tonic to ease the pain in her arthritic back and knees, Teresa stepped inside. I sighed in relief to see the 2 plates of chicken, potatoes, and corn. The helpings were large, but I'd learned not to argue. They might not have much, but this was their way of thanking me. That, and goblins had quite the appetite. "You've been busy," she commented, as she set the plates down on the table in the makeshift waiting room. I washed my hands, then joined her. She removed 2 beers from her pockets, then sat. "You are a lifesaver. We both know that's you." Companionable silence filled the clinic as we dug in. I finished the food in record time and sat back, enjoying the cold beer. Teresa picked at her food more than she ate it. Eventually, she shoved the plate aside and fiddled with the label on her beer bottle. "Orion, you want to tell me how bad he really is?" I asked. "He's been coughing up blood," she said quietly. "He thinks I don't know, but I'm the one who takes out the bathroom trash. I've seen the tissues. I was worried this would happen eventually. I thought we had more time. You've already done so much, and I know that, but if there's anything else that'll help Aiden." She sniffed hard, and then a tear slipped down her cheek. "I can't lose him. Not yet. I'm not ready to watch him die." I held her hand. "I know. I've got a few strong tonics I can make before I leave, but they're only going to put off the inevitable. To be completely honest, I'm surprised he's held on this long. Pretty sure that was because of you." She swiped at her eyes. "He told me the other day he wants me to be elder when he passes. And you should be. You take care of them all. You put them first." I don't think anyone would disagree with his decision. Wanting to cheer her up, I asked, "What does Henry think?" "Henry?" "Yeah, Henry. The guy you've liked for the last, 3 years? Longer." She tugged her hand free and took a long sip of her beer. "I wouldn't know because I haven't told him." "Teresa, for the love of the gods, you have to tell him how you feel." "Why? Not like he's shown any sign he likes me back, not like that at least." "Right, and have you, I don't know, done anything to test this?" I challenged. She shrugged, and it was like we were kids again with me picking on her for her pigtails. "What exactly should I do? Just go up and kiss him?" "I mean, if you want to be direct, sure, why not?" I said, laughing until she threw her napkin at me. "What?" "I'm just saying, I don't think you should wait much longer. You know, if he's still single after this long, it might be because he's holding out for you. Ever think of that?" From the way her lips screwed up to the side, she hadn't. "And what about you?" "What about me?" "And you're just trying to change the subject?" "No, well, a little, but seriously. You can't tell me you still enjoy living on your own in the woods." "I'm hardly ever alone. I travel, I see people. I get out in the world," I said, spreading my arms wide, but she was shaking her head. "How is that not being with people?" "You know what I mean, Aiden. When are you going to find that special someone? Many healers don't. You know that. Part of our calling. We end up alone." I finished my beer and glanced out the front windows as the sun set over the pastures. "Maybe we like it that way. That tone of uncertainty in your words says otherwise." I had nothing to say. Was I lonely? I used to think I'd be fine on my own. Most healers I knew were, but lately this strange sense of emptiness surrounded me. I was anxious, like I needed to go find someone, but I had no idea who. It was part of the reason I hadn't been to my cabin in over 2 months. Suddenly, being there wasn't as peaceful as it used to be. When I was first starting out, I was with others my age, or a few years older or younger. We learned the craft of healing together. Some broke off and became alchemists, but I was drawn to the healing arts. The tattoo of a crescent moon surrounded by sprigs of various healing herbs marked my right forearm, signifying me as a healer. The markings on my left pertained to the abilities I'd mastered. I was adept at tonics and poisons, as well as antidotes. I could also deal with most injuries, though even for the world of the Fae, there were some wounds even we couldn't recover from. Each of my skill sets was marked by a scroll with a lavender sprig wrapped around it. When I first started out, I believed my life would be fulfilled by using my gifts and going where I was needed. In some regard, it was. But I still came home to an empty cabin. I could spend weeks all alone, with only the birds to talk to. Not exactly the fulfilling life I dreamt about, but the idea of finding someone to share it with meant seeking out someone who would understand my life. And a Fae who did not look down on the goblins. That was probably the hardest part. "Your face is going to get stuck like that," Teresa said, pointing her beer at me. "Like what?" "Like you're questioning everything about your life." "Your fault. It's what friends are for." "Aha, and as your friend, if you don't say something to Henry before I leave this time, I will." That set her off on another tirade, and we were back to our usual bantering. She helped me clean up the clinic, and when I turned in much later that night, I managed to shove aside any worries about my sad, lonely life. I'd stay in Timber Falls at least one more day, then get home. The herbs would need picking, and I had a new list of tonics to make. There was no more avoiding going back to my quiet, lonely life.
Chapter 3. Iona. 3 days had passed since Jarek made the announcement he'd already found a suitable wife. Ever since, I'd sensed Mariana's eyes on me constantly. If hers weren't, a spy's were. I ordered Jarek's other bodyguards to be on high alert. When they asked what for, I told them to carry out their orders without question. Jarek, the damned optimistic Fae that he was, told me over and over there was nothing to worry about. "Iona," Henson called. I paused in the hall as he hurried up to me. I was on my way to check on Jarek before I turned in for the evening. "Latest report. Thought you'd want to see it." I took the paper he held out, skimmed it, and cursed. "And he wonders why I worry. You think it's serious?" "I don't know, but doesn't matter." I glanced over the report again. There was another protest in Charuz over Jarek's proposed changes to the goblin laws. It had started as a simple protest, and a fight had broken out. 7 people were seriously wounded, 1 was dead, and there was a report a half-hour later about the group terrorizing a local goblin community. It wasn't so much the fight breaking out that had me worried. The Fae who reported in said several of the Fae there were talking about removing Jarek from the throne, that Mariana would be better suited in his place. They could have just been talking, but one of the names listed was a familiar one. Luca. "I want Luca brought in," I told Henson. "For what?" "I don't care for what, I want him off the streets, and I wanted it yesterday. If there is going to be another attempt on Jarek's life, Luca's can damned well bet he'll be involved. I'll make sure it's done. And up the patrols," I ordered. "I don't want a single Fae stepping foot on royal grounds without knowing. If there's anyone here who's not supposed to be, you find me immediately." I folded the report and placed it in my pocket. Maybe if Jarek saw this, he'd understand why I kept urging caution moving forward. "Was there anything else?" "No, nothing." Henson took a second too long to reply. "Henson, just tell me. My night's already ruined." I was going to wait until I knew for certain, but I believe Mariana has figured out what's going on. "If you catch my meaning," he whispered. We were alone in the hall, but I understood his desire to stay quiet. Mariana's spies were everywhere. Maids, guards, even goblins who she seemed to hate so much. And? Iona, it's no secret how much she dislikes you. I just want to give you a heads up in case someone tries to kill you. Sucks to be them, I said, trying to lighten the mood, but Henson grabbed my arm. He never did that, unless the situation was serious. I capitulated and asked, "Did you hear her actually say that she was going to have me killed?" "No, but there was a strange fly in her chambers today. I didn't recognize his face, but he had the same markings as you do." He motioned to the skulls on my left arm. "I followed him when he left her chambers, but he just disappeared." "I'm sorry." Great. Not only did I have to worry about someone trying to kill Jarek, but they'd also be coming for me now too. "Thanks, Henson. Watch your back." "I will. You do the same. Everyone knows you're my closest friend." "Only friend," he said with a grimace. "I'll see you in the morning." I waited until he turned the corner, then continued toward the main staircase. The mansion was quiet at this time of night. I nodded to the guards stationed throughout, each of them returning the gesture. Jarek usually worked fairly late in his study. The other guard could escort him to his room, but lately I'd been doing it, if only for my sanity's sake. His study was in the east wing of the house. I turned the corner and my feet froze. There should have been a guard just outside the door. He was absent. The study was at the very end of the hall. There were only windows and none of them were open, but the door was. Slowly, I pressed my finger to the comm. "Henson, you copy?" Static crackled back at me. "Henson." "Shit." I drew my daggers, fire enveloping the blades the moment they were clear of the sheaths. I sniffed the air, but there were no unfamiliar scents on the air. Avoiding the squeaky spots in the floorboards, I crept down the long hall, poised and ready to attack. The door to Jarek's study was cracked open. Using one dagger, I nudged it and it swung inward. "Jarek?" Heart pounding, I expected to find his body on the floor. His. Or the guards. Nothing appeared out of place. There were no broken windows, no destroyed furniture. There were no signs of a struggle at all. The lamp on the desk was on, and there was a half-empty glass of bourbon beside a stack of papers. Any other guard might have thought Jarek simply went to bed early, but he was meticulous. He never left his lamp on. Hell, he never let booze go to waste either. "Jarek?" I walked the perimeter of the study. There were no closets or hidden passages out of here. Damn it. I sheathed one dagger and put my finger to the comm in my ear. "Anyone have eyes on King Jarek?" The static turned into a high-pitched shriek. I flinched, yanking the comm out of my ear. I had a half-second to realize something was wrong when the door to the study slammed shut. One hand grabbed me by the nape, and then there was a sharp stab at the side of my neck. I gasped, swinging around to attack, but everything was blurry. I called out, my words sluggish. Exhaustion slammed into me. I hit the floor hard, and my dagger fell away. A pair of booted feet filled my vision, and then there was nothing. I came to, face down on the rug. Head throbbing, I pushed up to my elbows and knees. My stomach roiled, but I managed not to vomit. What the hell happened? Dizzy, I waited for a second to get my bearings, then opened my eyes wide. Jarek's study. I was still here. I was still alive. The attacker. I spun around too fast and ended up back on the floor. Why was it so dark? The lamp had been on, right? A sharp pain shot down my neck to my spine. Some bastard had drugged me. It felt like cotton filled my ears, muffling all sounds. I scrambled to get to my feet. "Jarek?" I said, but it came out garbled. I coughed and tried again. There was no reply. I reached for my comm, but it wasn't with me anymore. Damn it. In my right hand was one of my daggers. I didn't bother to look at it too closely. Instead, I fumbled for the switch on the wall by the door. I hit it with my hand and the antique bronze chandelier popped on, flooding the room with light. I glanced around slowly, expecting to be attacked again. I spotted the pair of boots sticking out from behind the desk. No, I breathed as my heart sank. No, Jarek? Jarek. I sprinted across the study, biting back a yell at what I found. Jarek on his back, eyes frozen open wide. His throat had been slit. I checked for a pulse, even as the rational part of my mind said it was too late. He hadn't been in here earlier. I would have seen him. Jarek, I whispered as I clutched at his shirt, willing him to breathe. To be alive. Nothing made sense. After another glance over his body, as furious tears burned my eyes, I found a dagger protruding from his chest. A dagger with a unique hilt etched in onyx stones and rubies. A dagger that matched the one in my other hand. Jarek? Mariana called from down the hall. Brother, I know it's late, but I really need to talk to you. Jarek? Too numb, I didn't bother to move or say anything. Mariana walked into the study. I heard her rush around the desk, and then she was screaming. I continued to keep my hand pressed to Jarek's chest, willing him to take a breath, his heart to beat. Neither happened. I tuned out Mariana's hysterics as cold fury overrode my grief. Jarek was dead. He was dead, and it was my fault. I should have seen this coming. I should have stopped the bastard who drugged me. Arrest her. Mariana screamed, pointing at me. I frowned at Henson and 3 other guards behind her. What? You killed Jarek, she shouted as tears streamed down her cheeks and she gasped for air. I knew this would happen. I knew you'd be the death of him. You murdered our king. Why would I kill him? I snapped, refusing to stand. Look at the dagger in your hand, you half-blood bitch. I bristled at Mariana's words, but then I saw confusion quickly replaced by panic and fear in Henson's eyes. I followed his gaze to the other dagger in my hand. It was drenched in blood. My other dagger jutted out of Jarek's chest. The dagger dropped from my hand and I leapt to my feet. I didn't kill him, I said through clenched teeth. Prove it, Mariana whispered harshly. You dug your claws into him. You got close to him on purpose. You made him fall for you so you could kill him. I will not let you get away with this. Arrest her. Henson made no move to do so, but the other guards were Mariana's. They shoved Henson aside and charged me. I backed away from Jarek's body. They carefully stepped around him. 2 more blocked the study door. Mariana continued to cry, but the second the guards were all focused on me, she smiled like the evil fly she was. Seize her. King killer. You really want to do this? I asked the guards. They glanced to my bare forearms, then each other. None of them made a move to grab me. I did not kill King Jarek, I told them. Someone else was here and drugged me. Mariana stomped her foot, like she was a child throwing a tantrum, not like a sister upset over the death of her brother. If you do not arrest her, I'll have you all executed for conspiring to commit murder. And you, she said, aiming the last at me, I'll see you tortured and made an example of before you meet your end. The guards threw themselves at me, but I dodged to the right. They stumbled over each other. I kicked one in the side. He fell into his partner, and they tumbled onto Jarek's desk. My sorrow at Jarek's death turned into red-hot rage at Mariana's accusations. More guards were summoned by her screaming. Beside her, Henson looked torn. I shook my head. He had to save himself. Regret in his eyes, he came at me too. I grabbed a chair. Hoping I didn't hurt him too badly, smashed it over his head. He hit the floor. 2 more rushed me, coming in from the door as the first 2 climbed back to their feet. I blocked punches and kicked one in the gut, then headbutted another one. I might have been smaller than them, but I was the only one with goblin blood. My added strength gave me a slight advantage. Guards crowded the hall, and with them were several advisors. Shit. I wasn't getting out of here that way. A fist caught me in the side of the head, and another cracked my jaw. I staggered back and took a kick to the gut. Air knocked from my lungs, I gasped and fell into the back wall of windows. My hand struck glass, and I grimaced, realizing what I was going to have to do. The tattoo on my right arm burst to life as fire came to my palm. I smashed it into the window with a yell. Glass shattered, and I climbed out onto the narrow ledge. Don't let her escape. Get her. If only those advisors had ever learned to trust me, I might have had a chance to explain. Now I would be dubbed a traitor. A murderer. As I clung to the edge of the ledge over my head, and my boots barely fit on the one at my feet, I looked once more at Jarek's body. I'd never hear him laugh again or have him kiss me. All this time, I let myself believe we'd get a happy ending. 2 guards reached out the window. I shimmied along the ledge, then flipped onto the roof. Mariana's screams followed me as I clambered over the shingles, running around chimneys and carefully sliding down the steep peaks. My truck was parked in the main garage, but there were vehicles out on the grounds. I was not about to be locked away in a cell to rot. Mariana had hired an assassin, but it hadn't been to kill me, as Henson thought. I wiped furiously at my face, not even realizing how many tears had seeped out. Gunshots shattered the shingles around me. Iona. Mariana's head guard Eric yelled. Stop. You won't get away with this. I picked up the pace and misstepped, sending me sliding down the roof on my back. When my boots hit the gutter, I flipped over and barely caught another ledge on the way down. I slammed face first into the stone wall of the mansion. Blood dripped from my nose as my claws dug into the stone. There was nowhere for my feet to take hold. More shots struck nearby. I lost my grip. With a yelp, I plummeted into the hedges on the ground. I rolled out of the bushes. The grass was wet with dew, and the stars overhead were bright. I hit my head when I landed. A tiny voice in the back of my mind asked, what was the point in running? With Jarek dead, I had nothing to come back to. I gritted my teeth and flipped to my feet. I'd avenge Jarek's death. That was my purpose now. One way or another, I'd show them all that Mariana was behind his death. But I had to be alive to do it. Shots hit the ground a few feet behind me. Another blast struck my shoulder. I sucked in a sharp breath at the pain, put my head down and sprinted for the gravel lot. Staff black trucks lined the fence. I yanked the door open on one, slid behind the wheel and grabbed for the keys I knew were in the visor. The engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse. As the alarm sounded, I took off, engine howling into the night. Gravel flew as I floored it, heading for the main gate in the near distance. They hadn't shut it yet, idiots. As I aimed for it, the guards at the 2 watchposts shouted, waving their arms in the air to close it. I was only 20 yards away when the back window shattered. I ducked as bullets peppered the inside of the cab. One nicked my right arm. I jerked the wheel, swerving to throw off their aim. As I spun the wheel again, pressing the accelerator to the floorboards, the driver's window cracked and something slammed into my shoulder. It wasn't a bullet, but there was no time to see what it was. The gate had started to close. Digging my claws into the leather around the wheel, I urged the truck to go faster. When I reached it, the heavy iron gate took off the passenger side mirror and scraped along the truck's body, but I was out. New problem, I had no home outside of my quarters. No safe house I could hole up and the other guards wouldn't know about. The headlights bounced as I sped down the road away from my former home. I just had to get away and out of Charuz. That was my best chance at survival. The truck had a full tank of gas. I'd stay off the main roads and avoid any major towns. If I could make it to the Light Phi, I'd stand a chance of pleading my case. They were usually a bit more understanding. I hoped that would be the case. My left arm tingled where I'd been struck. I pressed my hand to my bare arm. There was a tiny drop of blood on my hand when I pulled it away. What are you? I muttered, trying to look without driving off the road. The tingling grew worse, reaching my fingers. When it crept up my shoulder toward my neck, panic set in. I took a sharp left, then another right, winding through the wilderness of Montana. Giving my head a hard shake, I told myself the tingling was nothing. A shard of glass, that's what hit me. Just a shard of glass. The further away I drove, the more my thoughts turned to Jarek. A single tear slipped down my cheek and dripped down my chin. "I'll find out who killed you," I assured him, wondering if he could hear me. "I won't let them tear your kingdom apart. Once I was safe, I'd let myself fall to pieces. Right now, I had to keep going and make it somewhere safe." I made another left onto a dirt road. The tingling inched up my neck, then across to my other shoulder. The turns became sharp, but there was no time to slow down. I would not let Mariana win. I couldn't. Not like this.
Chapter 4. Aiden. The truck bounced along the dirt road, which wound through the wilderness, and toward the small chunk of property where my cabin nestled among the trees. A small pond resided behind it, fed by a natural spring. I spent many mornings fishing, as the sun came up over the horizon. The herb garden was to the right of the one-story, two-room structure. It needed to be weeded and picked. Beyond the wooden post fence was a small greenhouse I'd constructed several years back. I saw it all clearly inside my mind. My little slice of home. After talking with Teresa again, right before I left Timber Falls, that sudden longing to find the missing piece to my life had grown. It was my own fault. She'd finally plucked up the courage to say something to Henry. She'd barely gotten the words out when he'd pulled her into his arms and kissed her. As happy as I was for my friend, the realization that I was indeed as lonely as Teresa assumed only sunk in deeper. "You're happy, remember?" I spoke into the silence of the cab. "You like being a healer. You don't mind being alone. You never have before." I rolled my eyes at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I failed in my lie to Teresa. I wasn't much better at lying to myself. A few minutes from the cabin, I glanced down to flip on the radio. Not much reception out here, but even static was better than the thoughts rattling around inside my skull. A flash of red caught my eye. I looked up, then slammed on the brake. The truck swerved as I jerked the wheel to the left and came to a sharp stop. Sucking in a deep breath, I stared through the windshield at the red taillights of another pickup. This one had slammed into a tree. The headlights were busted, and there was no light coming from inside the cab. "No one ever comes out here," I muttered to myself as I quickly climbed out. Was it someone trying to get to me? It was rare people sought me out, but it did happen. "Hello?" There was no reply from the other truck. I reached over to the glove box, grabbed the heavy metal flashlight, and hurried over. Hoping I wouldn't have to place a call to the fire relocation team, I hesitated, then shone the light into the front of the truck. The woman's face was smeared with blood, but she was certainly not a human. A sharply pointed ear that peeked out of her hair told me she was Fi and part goblin. As I stepped closer, my healer instincts kicking in, I spotted her hands hanging limply in her lap. Her nails were small black claws. She was dressed in all black too, but there was blood on both her arms as well as on the steering wheel. I reached in and carefully searched her neck for a pulse. The thump was steady beneath my fingers. Setting the light on the smashed-in hood of the truck, I opened the door. She slumped to the side, a grunt coming from her. "Hey. Can you hear me?" She was motionless. I wasn't going to stand here, wasting time trying to wake her up. Looked like she had a head wound, amongst other injuries. She was small, thankfully, but solid muscle, judging from her arms. I cradled her body and hurried to get her into the back seat of my old pickup. Her combat boots told me she was not merely an average civilian Fi. The one mark one could see well enough to identify told me she was from the Fighters Guild. I slammed the door shut, fetched my flashlight, then sped down the dirt road. The woman muttered a few times when the road grew bumpy, but she never woke up. By the time I reached the cabin, though, she'd fallen quiet. My home was lit up by a yellow porch light and nothing else. Not like I had anyone to leave lights on for me. I threw the truck in park, rushed inside to flip on more lights and clear off the cot I used for cases such as this, then sprinted back to the truck. I pressed my fingers to her neck again. Her pulse was weaker, and her breathing had turned ragged, as if she was fighting to get air. Her body seized violently in my arms. Foam formed at her lips, and I almost dropped her. I managed to lay her on the cot. In the full light of the cabin, I was able to see the extent of her wounds. "What happened to you?" I muttered as she continued to shake. "Where did you even come from?" The shaking ceased suddenly. She sucked in one more breath, then went completely still. I checked for a pulse again, and when I found none, started compressions. As I counted them off, I noticed the wound on her right arm. It looked like a gunshot wound. There was another injury on her left, but I couldn't decide what it was from without taking a closer look. If I couldn't get her heart beating again, it wouldn't even matter. "Come on," I snapped when there was no reaction. "I found you on that road for a reason. You're not going to die in my cabin. No one's ever died here. You're not going to be the first." Her body jerked with each hard compression. I paused long enough to check for a pulse. Still nothing. "You have to have something to live for," I told her firmly. "Someone in your life who's going to miss you. Don't die, you hear me? Don't die." As a last resort, I slammed my fist onto her chest. On the third try, she gasped for air. Her eyes fluttered open long enough for me to see how dark those irises were. Black. Pure black. Then they closed, and she went limp. At least this time there was a pulse. I scrambled to grab clean towels, ointments, bandaging, and anything else I thought I might need. Thankfully, unlike some healers I knew, my cabin was usually in some semblance of order. Everything was easy to find. As I laid it out on the rolling cart beside the cot, I picked up my phone and called Teresa. She'd been training to be a healer as long as I had. The only difference was she couldn't join a guild. Only half-fi goblins or pureblood fi could. I passed on everything I knew about healing to Teresa anyway. If anyone found out, I'd lose my place in the guild. A small price to pay to know Timber Falls had a backup healer if anything happened to me. The ringing of a phone filled the cabin after I placed the call on speaker. "Aiden. What's wrong? How fast can you get to my cabin?" "How fast do you need me there?" she replied. "What's wrong?" "Not sure yet, but I found someone who needs help. Might need an extra set of hands. The faster you can get here, the better." "On my way." She hung up. I focused on my new patient. Aside from the head wound and the 2 injuries on her arms, my new patient had several bruises, a split lip, bloodied nose, and lacerations from glass. The windshield of her truck had been cracked, but the glass shards I began pulling out with tweezers were colored, almost like they came from a stained glass window. The bits clinked in the metal tray as I removed them from her upper arm, then a few from her cheek and jaw. There was already a pale line that ran from her lower right cheek down to her neck. Her gunshot wound wasn't as serious as I first believed. More of a graze, really. She was lucky. I shifted from her right arm to her left. The tattoos there were skulls, 5 of them. I wasn't well versed enough with the other guilds to know what they meant. I froze. A weird uncertainty hit me that this woman, whoever she might be, was dangerous. And I'd brought her into my home without a second thought. Pull yourself together. You're a healer, and she's injured. Do your job. Squaring my shoulders, I reached down to remove some more glass from a few shallow cuts around the tattooed skin of her arm. I barely touched her skin with the tweezers when the hair on the back of my neck prickled. The air in the cabin that had been warm turned colder than the night outside. Craning my neck, I looked up the woman's body to find her eyes narrowed in a glare. I opened my mouth to tell her who I was, but she moved first. Her hand was around my throat, and she threw me into the nearest wall. My head slammed into the wooden planks, and stars appeared in my eyes. She dug black claws into my neck and grabbed something off the cart. The second the cold steel was against the underside of my jaw, I threw my head back to stop her from accidentally slicing me open with a scalpel. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Aiden," I sputtered. "I'm Aiden. I'm a healer." Her fingers fidgeted against my neck as confusion filled her eyes. "I don't know you." "I know, but I found you on the road. Your truck crashed into a tree." I licked my lips nervously, waiting for her to decide what her next move was going to be. "I don't crash?" "What crash?" When she turned her head, I caught sight of the dried blood in her hair. I'd given it a cursory glance after I'd gotten her heart going again, but there'd been no sign of major trauma. From this angle, the wound was superficial at best. What had caused the seizure then? Sweat beaded her brow, and then she was shaking again. The scalpel nicked my skin. I winced. She immediately withdrew it, but didn't remove her other hand from my neck. "Everything's fuzzy," she mumbled, and her breathing was ragged again. I can't see, and you, who?" The rest of her words trailed off as her eyes rolled back. She crumpled. I lunged forward to catch her. We hit the floor together as the violent shaking started all over again. This time her skin was on fire. I lifted her onto the cot and held her there until the shaking stopped. Her pulse remained, at least, but I had to figure out what was causing these symptoms. I stuck a thermometer in her mouth, and when I pulled it out, immediately rushed to grab gnarled black root and pixie sunflower seeds. Her fever was over 105. Any higher and she'd die. Moving as fast as I could, I ground the ingredients together, added a bit of a healing tonic, then dumped them all into a vial. As I swirled it, my gaze kept drifting back to the tattoos on her left arm. I might not know exactly what they meant, but with how quickly she moved and how easily she could have killed me, I had no doubt what they signified. She was a trained killer. The side of me that always lived on the side of caution said she shouldn't be in my cabin. Anything could go wrong. She could wake up again and decide this time she was going to kill me. There'd be nothing I could do to stop her either. I had very few fighting skills. Throwing a punch in a scuffle was one thing, but defending myself from someone trained to take a life was another. When the tonic in the vial turned a dark shade of blue, I lifted her head carefully and poured a few drops down her throat. She swallowed instinctively. I kept it up until the entire vial was empty. It would take about an hour to get the fever down enough that she wouldn't be in immediate danger. By then, Teresa would be here. She'd probably tell me I was an idiot for bringing this unknown half-goblin into my cabin, especially one that could kill me in a heartbeat if she wanted. Each time I treated a wound on her, I glanced to see if she'd woken up. Those eyes remained closed. Every now and then she shifted and let out a grunt, but she remained unconscious. When I reached the blood smear on her upper left arm, I frowned. I expected to see another graze wound from a bullet, or maybe a stab wound, but there was nothing. Nothing, except a barely visible tiny puncture. "What are you from?" I whispered to myself as I brought over another light and a magnifying glass. She must have been hit by a dart. It was too big to be a needle. I prodded the slightly reddened skin, and she jerked. I backed away and held my breath, waiting. Her head thrashed on the cot, then she stilled, breathing loudly. Her hair covered her face. Not sure why I did it, I reached over and gently swiped it aside. Now that the blood was off, I was able to get a better look at her features. Despite the hardness I'd seen in her eyes as she held a scalpel to my throat, there was a soft curve to her cheeks. The scar on her jaw was hardly noticeable beyond the subtle beauty of her face. She was certainly short, but I knew well enough how much muscle she had. Her whole frame was well-toned. "Who are you, huh?" "Killer." "Assassin." I returned to the puncture on her left arm. Hoping my luck held, and she remained unconscious a bit longer, I pinched the wound between my fingers and squeezed. If she had been poisoned, and I could figure out by what, I'd be able to treat her symptoms. The tonic I gave her for the fever wouldn't last forever if poison rampaged through her system. I squeezed harder, and a small drop of lime green sludge appeared mixed with her blood. I grabbed a swab and scooped it up. Placing a small bandage over the wound, I turned to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf that took up one whole wall in my cabin. An entire shelf near the bottom was dedicated to poisons and antidotes. Most poisons, sadly, had yet to have an antidote. That had been one of my side projects for the last few years. This lime green color nagged at my mind as I ran my fingers over the old leather spines with their gold or silver lettering. I'd seen this lime green color described recently. The heavy book on the far left with an all-black cover jogged my memory. I snatched it up and hefted it onto my work table. Holding the swab in one hand, I flipped through, page after page, muttering under my breath as I searched for what I needed to save the mysterious woman. The silence was only punctuated by the hoot of an owl outside, or the occasional rustling of leaves as the wind kicked up. There'd been a chance for a storm tonight and into the morning. A rumble of thunder shook the walls, and I paused long enough to glance out the window. A flash of lightning lit up the woods. I rubbed my eyes, forcing myself to blink a few times, then returned to my search. Every now and then, the woman twitched and shifted. The cot creaked each time, but she never awoke. I checked her for fever twice and shook my head when I felt it already coming back. I'd have to put the research aside while I made more fever reducer for her. I was in the middle of mixing up another batch of the blue tonic when the first drops of rain tapped against the windows. Headlights caught my attention, followed by the slamming of a car door. "Come in," I called, when there was a knock at the front door a second later. Teresa rushed in, water dripping from her hair. "All right, what's going on?" I nodded to the woman, and Teresa's eyes narrowed, then widened. "You recognize her or something?" "I think so. If not her face, I for sure know what those marks on her arm mean." "Damn, Aiden, what did you just get yourself into?" "Not like I intended to find a wounded person on my way home." "You just found her." "Her truck was crashed on the road. She was banged up pretty bad, but not from the crash." I mixed the ingredients together in a new vial and swirled them around, waiting for the color to change. "Those marks, what do they mean?" "The skulls. They mean she's damned good at what she does." Teresa walked all the way around the cot, taking in the woman's clothing. "I have seen her before." Then her eyes went wide, and she stumbled back. "Shit, Aiden. She's the head of King Jarek's personal guard." "What? Are you sure?" "Yeah, I think her name's Iona. This one time I was with Uncle Orion. He went to speak with the advisors about Timber Falls and the other communities. King Jarek made a surprise visit to the meeting, and she was with him." Teresa shook her head and backed away. "She scared the shit out of me then, and she does now. Some idiot tried to attack the king while we were there. She took him down in 3 seconds flat. Never seen someone react that quickly. Or kill without a thought," she added on a whisper. "Was she alone?" "Yeah. Just her and her truck. Looked like she'd been through one hell of a fight." "Why is she out?" "Poison." I pointed to the swab on the work table. "I thought it was just from a head wound, but now she's got a fever that keeps coming back. That substance came out of the puncture wound." The liquid in the vial turned blue and hurried to give the woman a second dose. Usually, a second one wasn't needed. Teresa watched all the while. The woman sputtered but swallowed it down. Her hand shot out suddenly, and she latched onto my arm. Teresa yelled in alarm, but the woman made no move to kill me this time. "Jarek," she whispered, her claws digging through my skin. "Jarek," the rest of the words cut off as she seized again. "Teresa, help me with her." Like any true healer, Teresa didn't pause. She rushed over and held down the woman's right side, as I did the same to her left. This wasn't a normal seizure. When the woman's eyes shot open, they were cloudy, almost like they were turning white. Earlier, she'd said she couldn't see. Now I feared the poison she'd been dosed with was stealing her sight. When the shaking stopped, I smoothed her hair back from a forehead slick with sweat. "We need to figure out what this poison is," I told Teresa, but my eyes remained on the woman's face. "Are you sure? Why don't we just alert the guard? She could die by the time they get here." "Why was she even out here?" Teresa asked quietly, as if afraid the unconscious woman would hear her. "You said she was banged up. Where's the rest of her guard? Where's the king?" "I don't know, but we're healers. This is what we do. If you don't want to help, I understand, and you can go. I returned to the leather-bound book and my search. Teresa muttered several curses that made me smile. Then she was at my side, with another heavy volume in hand. "You owe me," she said, as she dropped it on the table. "If you help me save her life, I'll owe you 20 favors." I threw a worried glance over my shoulder at the woman on the cot, quietly promising I wasn't going to let her die, then went on a hunt for a poison my gut told me had no antidote.
Chapter 5. Iona. Jarek. I had to get to him. I was in the mansion. His study was just at the end of the hall. The door was wide open, and there was no guard there. I called out to him, but my voice was muffled like I was yelling through a pillow. I tried again, but there was still no sound. I was a few yards from the door when the lights went out, plunging me into darkness. A thud came from the office, then the sounds of a fight. Iona. Jarek. No. I sprinted down the corridor, crashed through the door, and found a shadowy figure holding Jarek with a dagger to his throat. I reached for my weapons, but they weren't at my hips. I bared my pointed canines and made ready to fight to save Jarek's life. Something sharp stabbed into the back of my neck. The room spun, and as I hit the floor I caught the blurred images of Jarek being stabbed. The shadowy figure dragged the other dagger across my king's throat. I stretched out my hand toward him. Another hand took mine. An unfamiliar one. "It's all right. You need to lie still." That voice. I'd heard it before, but it wasn't Jarek. I jerked my hand back with a growl and shoved at the darkness surrounding me. I couldn't see anything at first. Then shapes came into view. That's all they were. Shapes. I can't see," I rasped, blinking furiously to try and clear away the fog. "Why can't I see?" "You were poisoned. We're working on finding an antidote, but you need to lie still. Your fever's back. It's making you seize." His voice was kind and soft. It soothed me, but then Jarek's face floated to the surface of my mind. He was dead, with my dagger jutting out of his chest. I attempted to get up again, but more hands grabbed me and held me down. I snarled and cursed, aiming a punch at the moving shape, but was too weak to land it. A larger hand covered mine and rested it back at my side. "Dead," I gasped when breathing became hard. "Dead. My fault. Failed him, I failed him." "Who's dead?" the voice asked. "Jarek. King Jarek," I gasped as a shock of pain struck my back. I arched upward while two sets of hands held onto my shoulders and arms. The man's voice was followed by a woman's, both frantic. I couldn't make out what they said over my screams and snarls. When the seizing finally stopped, I collapsed, more exhausted than I had been just a few seconds ago. "Her fever's back, higher than the last time," the woman said, sounding worried. "Aiden, we have to take her somewhere." "Where?" "If I can't find an antidote, they won't be able to either. She's going to die," and what she said about the king. The tension between these two people I couldn't see rose enough for me to feel it. "I didn't kill him," I whispered on a breath. There was a long pause of silence. Then, "You see? They think she killed him. They're going to be looking for her, and we have no idea who she is. I'm not just handing her over without getting the whole story. She was attacked. Yeah, probably because she killed him. I might not have had a lot of strength, but my instinct as a trained assassin let me find my target without being able to see her fully. I fisted my hand in her shirt and dragged her to me. The man yelled, but I bared my canines at him to back off. His outline froze, and the woman I held in my grasp did the same. "I did not kill him," I snapped. "He is my king, was my king," I corrected. "All right," the man said, and his hand gently covered mine, which was still holding tight to his companion. "We believe you. You have to rest now." When I still didn't let go, he pried my fingers loose. "I didn't kill him," I repeated, the pain inside me twisting into a vicious knot as it hit me all over again. I lost not just my king, but the Fae I had loved. He was dead. Gone. I won't let anything happen to you, not until we get this sorted, the man assured me. I wasn't about to trust him, but another touch fell on my shoulder, one I knew very, very well. Jarek, I whispered and fell back to the cot. The sensation of his touch drifted to my cheek. I leaned into his hand as my eyes fluttered closed. The hushed voices of the two people fell away, and it was just me and Jarek. The same two voices roused me from a feverish dream. I'd been with Jarek in his study, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. We'd been sitting close on the couch, enjoying some time alone. He'd said something toward the end, but it was lost in a whooshing that filled my ears. Then came a weird clicking sound. I frowned, trying to reach for Jarek, but he fell away like he wasn't even there. His lips moved again, but then he was gone. I came to, and was able to see this time at least. I was in a log cabin. The shelves covering the walls were filled with jars of herbs, tonics, books, and more herbs and ingredients. Dried bunches of plants hung from the ceiling. A rustling sounded behind me, and I twisted my head around. A tall, lean Phi stood at a table, tapping his fingers. Pointed ears stuck out from a mess of silver hair. His hands weren't wrinkled though, so he wasn't old. "You have to be in here somewhere," he murmured. I pushed up on my elbows, but my arms gave out. The cot squeaked as I fell back. The man immediately whirled around and hurried over. "You can't get up yet, I'm sorry," he said as he pulled the heavy blankets over me. I shivered, my teeth clacking together. Now I knew what that weird clicking sound had been in my dream. "Where am I?" I managed to get out between my chattering teeth. "My home. I found you on the road." "What road?" A conversation came back to me in pieces. He said there'd been an accident. "Doesn't matter. What does matter right now is healing you." "Poison." He nodded, his forehead crinkling. "One I've never seen before." "Just rest." He smoothed the hair back from my forehead, then placed a cool rag on it. With him hovering over me, I had nothing to look at but his face. Kind light green eyes stared back at me, a question in them. There was worry too. His right arm was marked with a tattoo, one I wasn't familiar with. His gaze followed mine. "Healer. You're in good hands." "Hope so," I mumbled. "Don't let me die, not yet." I wasn't one for begging, ever, but the words came out before I could stop them. I grabbed the man's wrist and brought him closer. "I have to avenge him, you hear me? I have to." I shivered, and my teeth chattered harder. The healer, I thought the woman had called him Aiden, tucked the blankets in around me, then placed his hand to my cheek. "Your fever's back. Rest. I'll do everything I can to save you. That's a promise." Trusting strangers was another thing I never did, but those light green eyes put me at ease. A figure appeared behind him, and tears came to my eyes. Jarek. He was there, watching over Aiden's shoulder. His body faded in and out, but he nodded firmly, as if to tell me to listen to this healer. He wasn't really there. He couldn't be. He should have moved on. His lips lifted in the crooked grin I'd fallen for. He moved through Aiden, and for a split second it was Jarek's hand against my cheek. I leaned into it as Aiden's brow furrowed. Then Jarek was gone and I fell back asleep, unsure if I'd live. Unsure if I even wanted to. "Fight," I thought I heard Aiden whisper close to my ear. "You have to fight." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one currently on death's doorstep. He said more, but then I was drifting away on a current of feverish dreams.
Chapter 6. Aiden. As Iona passed out again, her eyes flitted behind their lids, clearly from feverish dreams. She'd been in and out of it the last 2 days. She hadn't been coherent enough to give me more information on how she ended up in a truck on the side of an old dirt road. The poison continued to rampage through her body. I'd been confident I'd find a way to save her, but going on day 3, that confidence began to waver. I rubbed my eyes and went to take a sip of coffee, only to find the chipped red mug empty. The pot was empty too. "Course you are," I muttered, and pushed away from the work table to get another one going. ever since Iona asked me not to let her die, and how intensely she told Teresa and me she had nothing to do with Jarek's death, I'd been wondering about her and the late king. I believed her when she said she didn't kill him. The fierceness in her gaze wasn't something a guilty person could fake. "Jarek," she whispered. I stopped making coffee. "Jarek." She lifted her shaking hand, but her eyes remained closed. Teresa might be uncertain about Iona, but I was beginning to think she was more than just the king's head bodyguard. She wanted to avenge his death. A head guard might want to do that too, I guess, but not with that much conviction. When she was awake last, I was sure she was seeing someone else in the cabin. Someone other than me. She could merely be hallucinating. Then again, if she and Jarek were more than just king and bodyguard to each other, I leaned toward the chances that whatever she was saying might be real. I thought I might have sensed a presence in the cabin, but it wasn't strong enough for me to be certain if I was actually feeling it or if I was simply overtired. Iona's hand fell back to the bed. She shook all over. I hurried to check her fever. It was back again. Quickly, I grabbed another cool cloth and draped it over her forehead. I took more towels, dipped them in ice water, and laid them over her arms and across her chest. She raised her hand toward my face as her eyes opened. She squinted, then cursed, and her arm dropped. "You." "Yep, still me. Sorry to disappoint." She tried to sit up, but I pushed her back down. "I don't want to lie down anymore." "I don't really care. You're still running a very high fever. You're weak. You won't make it more than a few steps." "What day is it?" she rasped and gave up on trying to get off the cot. "Doesn't matter." She swallowed hard, then threw her head to the side, vomiting. That was a new symptom. I rushed around, putting a bucket under her face, and held her hair back. The vomit was a dark shade of green, mixed with what looked like black sludge. When she finished heaving and wiped her mouth on her forearm, she laughed. The bitter sound grated on my ears. "Damn that bastard." I frowned, not sure who she was referring to. "King Jarek." "No, you moron. King Jarek didn't poison me with this shit." She spat into the bucket, then fell back. The bags under her eyes looked worse than they had a few moments ago. The vomiting seemed to have drained her of whatever bit of energy she managed to save up from sleeping these last few days. Knew I should have killed him when I had the chance. I'd never seen a poison create this array of systems, and was amazed she was even alive at this point. "You know what this is?" "Yeah. Reaper venom." I blinked, then shook my head. "No, that can't be it." "And how would you know, huh?" "I've been studying poisons and antidotes for the last 30 years of my life, that's how," I informed her. "That poison is an urban legend at best. No one's ever been able to make it work." She cackled as she stared at the ceiling. "He did." Her eyes began to close, and she gritted her teeth as if fighting back a scream of pain. "Good luck with saving me now." Probably for the best. When she opened her eyes again, the haze that had cleared earlier was back. Should have known she'd hire him. Her head rolled to the side. "Iona." I tapped her cheeks to rouse her, but she was out. If she knew what the poison was, she might know the antidote. Reaper venom. It was in many of the older books, but there was no exact recipe to make it. Worse was there was no antidote listed. If I could find all the variations of it and figure out the ingredients they'd used, there could be a way to counteract them. I had a tonic that could isolate specific parts of a poison. Might make it easier to tackle. After giving Iona another dose of the fever-reducing tonic, I got the coffee brewing and rushed to the stacks of books I'd already pulled from the shelves. I had a few hundred in my small cabin. If I had to go through all of them to figure out this mystery, I would. I was on my third pot of coffee and the 10th book that contained a possible recipe to create Reaper venom when a car door slamming made me jerk. I dropped the heavy leather-bound book on my foot and was hopping around on one leg when Teresa bustled inside. She had 2 paper sacks filled with food and gave me a curious look as she set them on the small counter in the kitchen. Iona mumbled quietly. Teresa gave the half-goblin a weird look. "We have problems," she said, hurrying back to check out the front window. "You think?" "I just found out what this poison is," I muttered, rubbing my sore foot. Teresa grabbed my arm. "Aiden, listen to me. There are royal guards in town. In Timber Falls. Yeah, and they're looking for her. They're turning everyone's place inside out to find her. I'm going to assume they know about you, right? I'm a registered healer." "Of course they do." "Then you have to turn her over to them or something," she said in a panic. "They looked ready to kill. The Phi leading them, he wasn't normal," she added on a whisper. Teresa had been through much hardship in her life, and I rarely, if ever, saw her scared. Her hand trembled. She was terrified of whoever this Phi was. "Please, I don't want anything happening to you because of some stranger." Iona mentioned a he when I asked her about the poison. Was this him? If he made the poison, it was safe to assume he had the antidote. If he did come here, then I could. I could what? I ran my hand furiously through my hair and kicked my work table, yelping as I hopped around. Teresa eyed me like I was on the verge of losing it. I probably was. I wasn't a fighter. If he came here, I wouldn't be able to convince him to save Iona, not if he was the one who poisoned her. There was no way I could fight him for it either. The question remained. What happened to King Jarek, and why did they think Iona was the killer? Did you hear them say anything else about her? I asked Teresa, gingerly standing on my injured foot. Yeah, that she's wanted for high treason and the murder of our king. Aiden, please just let them take her. She's not doing well anyway. I'm not letting her die. You might not have a choice. If they find you harboring her, what do you think they'll do to you, huh? Or me if I'm here? I'm a goblin, remember? They might take us in with her." She was right. I was fine with putting myself at risk, but I couldn't ask Teresa to do the same. "Leave, go back to Henry, and stay away from my cabin until I call you," I urged as I guided her toward the front door. "What? I'm not leaving you here alone with her," she shouted and put her hands against the doorframe to stop herself from being shoved out to the porch. "Yes, you are. I'll be fine." "No, Aiden. You're being ridiculous. Why do you care so much about one Phi, huh? She's one of them, remember? I know you're not a goblin, but you sure as hell don't act like any full-blooded Phi I know." She pushed back and I let her go. She was the head bodyguard for the king. Yeah, a king that was trying to make things better, I argued. Besides, I don't think she was just his head guard. "What do you mean?" I glanced back at Iona and remembered the pain that had been in those black eyes. It wasn't just pain from losing a king. Do you recall hearing any rumors about Jarek having a future wife in the works? Or someone he might have been seeing? Anyone ever in his time as king? Teresa nodded, then stopped and tilted her head. Her face took on a quizzical expression, then her jaw dropped and her eyes went wide. "Are you saying he was involved with her?" "I'm saying, I think there's more to this situation than we're able to see." "Aiden, I mean, come on. She's a half-breed. They'd never let them be together. They sure as hell wouldn't let her be his queen. They might have been having an affair, but it couldn't be more than that." "Not that it matters now anyway," I said quietly. "Either way, I'm not letting these guards take her away. Not yet. When I figure out the antidote for the poison and get the whole story, then." "Then what?" She cut me off. "You have no idea what she's capable of. You said she already tried to kill you. Wouldn't you do the same if you woke up in a strange place?" "No, actually, I wouldn't." I didn't care what Teresa said. I wasn't giving up on Iona. It wasn't in me to just hand over a wounded and dying person, no matter who they were. It was one of my faults. My teacher, amongst others, had told me being too nice would eventually be the death of me. If that was my fate, then so be it, but no one was taking this woman out of my care. Not yet. The air in the cabin shifted, and the hairs on my arm stood up. There were many Fae who were sensitive to the presence of spirits, ghosts, whatever the humans wanted to call them. I was one of them, but it was so rare, I usually forgot I could until I bumped into one. Or until they stood right in front of me. Aiden. I held up a hand to Teresa and slowly looked around. There was no one I could see, but someone else was here. I could feel it. He hadn't been earlier, but he was now. And it was definitely a he. His presence was strong, intense, and focused on Iona. He wasn't intimidating exactly, but he was letting me know he was there. I closed my eyes, breathing in and out deeply through my nose. Teresa said my name again, but it sounded from far away. I reached out with my sixth sense, turning toward where I thought the Fae stood. A Fae I quickly realized was King Jarek. His form took shape slowly. There was the familiar head of red hair, and the thick beard that covered his face. His shoulders were broad, and he stood taller than me. If he noticed me, he made no indication. He leaned over Iona, and rested his lips against her forehead. I couldn't see him with my waking eyes, but in this light meditative state he was there, plain as day. I wondered how long he'd been watching over her. He was staring right at me. I tried to open my eyes, but they wouldn't, and then he was walking toward me. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. The steely gaze that had me rooted to the spot was loud and clear. If I let Iona die, if I let those Fae take her, Jarek would take out his undead rage on me. I nodded firmly, and then sucked in a deep breath as I was able to open my eyes again. Teresa was holding my arm. I blinked rapidly, trying to get my bearings back. Aiden, can you hear me? Teresa asked. Aiden. Yeah. I'm fine, I replied, and hurried around her to check on Iona. She seemed more at peace than she had since I brought her here. The fever remained, though. The stack of books on the floor awaited me, but they'd have to wait. Teresa, I need to hide her. If you want to leave, I suggest you do it now before the guards get here. I have a feeling they're getting close. She threw her head back, and I was pretty sure she was cursing me profusely. Fine, I'll help, but if we get arrested, I'm blaming everything on you. I hope you have a plan. I shrugged and beamed at her. I do, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to like it. Barely an hour after I saw Jarek, several car doors closing reached my ears. I'd almost forgotten about Iona's crashed truck on the only road that led to my cabin. While Teresa had taken care of things here, I'd raced out there to hide the damaged truck the best I could. Getting it deeper into the woods had been a challenge, but I'd managed. Now I was in the front room with a small cauldron bubbling in the hearth, and dried herbs strewn everywhere, the exact ones I'd use if I was treating a severe case of goblin pox. I'd burned sage, as well as a few other choice plants for the last 20 minutes, filling the air with hazy smoke. Anyone not used to them would get woozy fairly quickly. The door to the back room was closed. I wanted to double-check on my patient, but a knock hard enough to rattle the wooden door on its hinges came from the front of the cabin. Just a moment, I called. Open up, healer, a gruff voice shouted back. By order of the late King Jarek and the council. Praying Jarek's spirit might still be around to watch over Iona, in case this went sideways, I opened the front door. 6 guards, all dressed in black, stood on my porch and on the front steps. They were part of the royal guard. They parted, and a tall Fae with legs like tree trunks, a chest that made me wonder how he managed to not tear his shirt each time he moved, and slanted black brows stomped onto the porch. He gnawed on a toothpick, and though I couldn't see any weapons, something told me he was well armed. Was this the Fae Iona was talking about? He didn't look like he'd use poison. He looked like he'd rather crush someone's skull with his meaty hands. You are Aiden. Yes. Can I help you, gentlemen? He spat the toothpick from his mouth, eyes narrowed. Goblins in town say you take just about anyone in. Heal them, patch up their wounds. I bowed. It's what any healer would do, I replied, and took a half step backward. The Phi peered around me, then turned. Looks empty, boss. Smells like shit. I wasn't sure who he was talking to when another Phi stepped out from behind the black SUV parked on my gravel drive. This Phi sported a long black trench coat that brushed his knees. He wore all white underneath, contradicting sharply with his jet black hair and dark eyes. I wasn't sure if I was meant to be impressed by him or not when those eyes found mine. The large Phi had given me pause with how easily he could crush me. This one emitted a wave of malice. He might not be able to crush me with a single hand, but he'd drag out my death slowly and painfully. He had to be the one Iona meant. I fought the urge to run inside and slam the door. They'd just break it down. Stick to the plan. I just had to stick to the damn plan. Have you treated any half-goblins in the last few days? He asked as he stomped up the steps and stood before me. Well, healer? I don't have all day. I haven't, I said, proud of myself that my voice didn't shake. His eyes narrowed, and his lips curled up in a sneer. Is that truly the answer you wish to give? It's the truth. I've been away for the last month anyway. Only returned a couple of days ago. He peered over my shoulder and inside the cabin. And you have no one inside now. When he moved to walk through the door, I moved with him, stopping his progress. Those cold eyes narrowed, and his hand twitched like he was about to go for a weapon. You don't want to go in there, I assured him. I had to bring a very sick goblin back with me to treat her. She has a serious case of the pox. The other guards all took one large step back. Even the hefty guy paled as he staggered away. Not the Phi in charge, though. I'd like to see this goblin of yours. As you wish, but it's not a pretty sight. Have you been vaccinated? The Phi said nothing. I shrugged, turned my back, and prayed to whatever gods might listen, prayed to Jarek himself that somehow this Phi would be convinced by what was through that door and leave. I led him through the hazy front room of the cabin to the back room where I usually slept. I reached for the metal knob, but the Phi shoved me aside. I'll do it myself. I motioned him to go for it and took a large step back. He turned the knob and rushed inside the room as if he was going to find Iona standing there waiting for him. 5 seconds later, he staggered back out, gagging and gasping for air. The look of disgust on his face was all I needed to see to know the plan worked. I warned you, I said quietly. His hand was around my throat in a shot. He slammed me into a wall of shelves, knocking glass jars and ceramic jugs crashing to the floor. He cut off my air as he leaned in. Listen closely, healer. You are a borderline traitor as far as I'm concerned, treating the goblins like you would your own. They are. I gasped until he tightened his hold. Black spots filled my vision, and I tugged at his hand to get free. Not that it did me any good. If you are lying to me, I will find out. Iona is being charged with the murder of King Jarek. She will be brought to justice one way or another. Anyone involved with her will suffer the same fate. He threw me aside, and I lay on the floor, hacking and holding my bruised throat. He crouched in front of me, grabbed me by my hair, and hoisted me upright. And get that filth out of your home. Give her a good clean death like the rest of them should have. He let me go, took one more look around the cabin, then was gone. Car doors slammed outside, and gravel cracked against the windows of my home as they sped away back down the road. I was still coughing and struggling to breathe when Teresa rushed out of the back room. That's it, you're officially crazy, she snapped even as she helped me to my feet, then to the cot. Aiden. I waved her off, assuring her I'd be fine in a minute. Iona. I rasped. How is she? Fever's back. She's getting worse. I let her help me up, glancing at the heavy amounts of pastes and smashed herbs we used to make it appear as if she had a severe case of goblin pox. There were what appeared to be gaping sores on her face and arms, leaking thick streams of pale green pus. In reality, they were large globs of plant sap. The smell in the back bedroom was what really sold the deal. That was courtesy of some herbs I'd found rotting in the garden. Maybe you should get cleaned up first, I told her. Then if you're willing to stay, we're going to have to find a way to counteract this poison before it kills her. It would take hours, no days, to find the right combination to heal Iona. If Teresa wasn't willing to stay, the chances of saving Iona in time were slim to none. I waited for her to say she was leaving. Instead, she pulled out her cell, hit a few buttons, and placed it to her ear. "Henry, it's me," Teresa said. "How fast can you get to Aiden's cabin? And bring Uncle Orion if you can. Don't let anyone know you're leaving or where you're going." I mouthed thank you, then hurried to the back room to check on Iona. Teresa had covered Iona with a heavy blanket, then lay down right in front of her, blocking her from the Phi's view. If he'd been able to stand the harsh stench of sickness lingering in the air, he would have found Iona. Carefully, I picked up her petite body and took her back to the front room and fresh air. Her skin burned, the fever was so high. I covered her with cold compresses, then checked her eyes. "Gods, what kind of poison is this?" Teresa whispered, wiping the rest of the herbs from her face. "It's called Reaper venom for a reason," I replied. "From what I've read, it attacks the system, primarily the senses, as it kills. If we can't find the antidote fast enough, she'll never be able to see again. Her hearing will go next, I believe. Then the others will follow." I looked to the stacks of books. "We're fighting against the clock. Why are you so sure she didn't kill Jarek?" Teresa placed her hand on my arm. "Just give me that much, since I'm risking imprisonment or worse here." As I started to tell her, I glanced at Iona, wondering if Jarek's spirit was still around. Before they came, I sensed someone here. A spirit. When I focused on it, I saw a Phi watching over her. He kissed her forehead, and then he gave me a look that pretty much said he'd find a way to make my life a living hell if I let her die. "All right. And Teresa, it was King Jarek." "You're sure?" I gave her a look, and she sighed. "That's why you believe she didn't kill him, because what, he loved her or something?" "And I'm guessing she loved him." "You understand what you're saying? No one would allow him to marry her. She's half-goblin." I walked around Teresa to the stack of books and promptly sat down on the floor. "If she didn't kill Jarek, then this might be why he was killed, and they're framing her," I explained. "Not as if Jarek's policy changes have been very popular. I never heard him announce that he picked a wife." "Neither did I, but then we're not living in the compound." I flipped open the first book, where I found a recipe for Reaper venom. "You going to stand there all day looking at me like I'm nuts, or grab a book and help?" I asked without looking up. As I dragged a second book down to search through, Teresa joined me on the floor. She pulled over a stack for herself and sighed, "You're nuts." I ignored her comment, but gave her a brief, appreciative smile. The only other sounds in my small cabin, aside from flipping pages and jotting down notes, were the quiet murmurings of Iona as she dreamt. Several times, I sensed Jarek's spirit lingering, but I didn't have the time to verify or study him. Iona's time was running out. Any breath could be her last, and that was unacceptable, though part of me did wonder why I cared so much for this half-goblin who'd crashed into my life. It was starting to feel a bit too coincidental that I found her on the dirt road leading to my cabin. If she had no idea who I was, then how had she made it that far, unless someone guided her to me? "You sure this is going to work?" Orion asked skeptically as he held up the large vial. He swirled it around 2 more times as I'd instructed, but it remained thick and murky. It reminded me of bad pond water. Smelled like it too. "Aiden, I know you're a good healer and all, but this looks like it might finish her off." "This is one of those times you're just going to have to trust me," I said as I moved around Iona. For the last 2 days, we'd been working around the clock. I hadn't slept more than an hour or two here and there. We ended up with 25 versions of the Reaper venom. They were more similar than I originally thought, but that wasn't much comfort after I dug into how complex they were. The method to brew them all was different, as were some of the major ingredients. What we came up with was currently contained in the vial Orion held. It was more of sludge than tonic, but it had something in it to counteract the varying versions of the Reaper venom. The only way to test it was to give it to Iona and see what happened. The fever reducer had stopped working 12 hours ago. Her skin was flushed, and her teeth chattered as if she was freezing. She'd vomited several more times, but never became fully conscious. I'd been able to pass her off as simply someone in need of aid, until Orion and Henry both heard her calling for Jarek. She'd fallen off the cot, trapped in a fever dream, shouting for someone to save the king. Once we got her settled down, I'd had to come clean about who she was. Neither goblin had fled, though Orion had given me a quizzical look I didn't fully understand. She might react violently at first, I warned Orion and Teresa. Henry was gone. Teresa had sent him home once we had the antidote blended. Orion refused to leave, no matter how much Teresa begged him to. "We're ready, I think." Teresa stood at the foot of the cot, with her hands braced around Iona's ankles. I gripped her shoulders as Orion moved in. He gently tilted her head back, then poured the sludge down her throat. Iona gagged and sputtered. Orion massaged her throat, helping her swallow, then poured in some more. I grimaced each time Iona choked, but she managed to swallow the concoction down. "Now what?" Orion asked as he set the vial aside. "We wait," I said, then flinched when Iona's back arched and her mouth opened in an ear-piercing scream. She flailed on the cot as we struggled to keep her pinned down. White foam appeared on her lips, and then she was vomiting. I quickly flipped her onto her side as massive black globs hit the floor. I was worried she was spitting up the antidote, but when her eyes opened, they were clear. "The venom," I told the others over her heaving. "She's getting the venom out." Iona spat one more time, then collapsed on the cot. Her eyes were closed again, and her breathing was heavy. I checked her pulse to find it beating fast, but it had clearly begun to settle. For the first time since bringing her to my cabin, her skin was cool to the touch. I rested my hand against her forehead and mumbled a prayer of thanks to find it covered in sweat. The fever finally broke. "She will live?" Orion asked. "Yeah, I think so." "Good, then you get some sleep. I'll watch over her." I told him I was fine, but he grabbed me by my shoulder and guided me to the back room. "Really, I can't ask you to do this. After all you've done for our small community, this is the least we can do. Sleep, Aiden. If she wakes, I'll let you know, but you'll be no good to anyone if you die from exhaustion." I doubted I'd sleep, as I shrugged out of the flannel shirt I'd been wearing for days. I fell onto the bed and flipped off the lamp. My eyes slipped closed, and right before I passed out, I was sure I heard a male Phi whisper, "Thank you."
Chapter 7. Iona. Iona. I shifted, my body aching as if I'd been lying down too long. "Iona, you need to wake up now." Jarek. He was speaking to me, but I couldn't see him. There were shapes around me, but they were only shadowy figures. I tried to speak, but the words were stuck. "You need to wake up," he repeated. "You can't stay with me." I wanted to ask him why I'd ever leave him, when a horrible vision manifested inside my head. Being in Jarek's study, only to be knocked unconscious. Then I woke up to find him dead, killed by my very blades. Blades I'd sworn on to protect his life. "I failed you," I whispered. "No, you haven't failed me. You have to stop them, Iona. Stop them before it's too late. I should have listened to you, but I was too trusting. Stop them. Save the kingdom. Save them all. Use him." I frowned. "Use who?" "Wake up and see." His hand cupped my cheek and I leaned into it, but too soon his touch faded. "I'll be watching over you, love. Always. Jarek." My eyes opened as his name left my lips. Sunlight streamed in through wooden shutters. Morning, I conjectured, from the chilly temperature, despite a small fire burning in the hearth nearby. The air was a bit hazy, as if someone had burned something not too long ago. I blinked a few more times to clear away the fog, to find myself in a cabin. The healer. I was still at his place. How long had I been here? Rolling over was a pain. My muscles were stiff. I bit my lip to stop from cursing viciously as I pushed myself into a sitting position. My head swam and I waited to be sick, but nothing came up. The room was more of a mess than the last time I'd seen it. The front door was also cracked open. I licked my lips and tried to call out, but had to clear my throat a few times. Hello? When there was no answer, I swung my legs over the cot and hobbled away. I felt like I'd been hit head-on by a truck. Each step was a challenge, but somehow I made it across the room, over the books scattered haphazardly everywhere, and to the doorway. There were a bedroom and a bathroom, both empty. I quickly went to relieve myself. After I splashed water on my face, which was far paler than normal, with dark bags under my eyes, I made it back to the main room and to the front door. I had nothing on me to use as a weapon, so I grabbed a heavy wooden bowl. It wasn't much, but it would do. Fighting against the wave of dizziness that hit me, I burst out the front door and spun to my right. A chair scraped loudly against the front porch, as I stopped from striking the healer on the head with my makeshift weapon. He sat in a wooden chair next to a goblin man. Both held steaming mugs of coffee in chipped red mugs. The goblin, older by quite a few years, had a bemused grin on his face. Aiden gulped as he stood, holding up his other hand to show he wasn't armed. Can you put the bowl down, please?" he asked. His courteous manner caught me off guard. I handed it over without question. He took it and set it far out of my reach. What did you do to me?" I asked. "I healed you. Took a while, but looks like the antidote worked." I scrunched my face in confusion. "Antidote? To what? What's the last thing you remember?" I thought of my latest conversation with Jarek, which I was mostly certain had been in my head. "I came to and you were there," I said slowly. "I told you something. You were sick," he picked up for me. "You said it was Reaper venom." I stumbled back a step, eyeing the goblin sitting by Aiden. "If that's what it was, then I'd be dead." "You're wrong." "No, you were right. We found an antidote. Took a few days, but we made it work." "Few days?" I shouted. "How long have I been here?" "A week today," he replied. I grabbed the front porch railing. A week. I'd been lying nearly dead for a week while Jarek's real killer ran loose. While Mariana went through whatever plans she had made. She had to be the one behind his assassination. Aiden approached, but I held up my hand to ward him off. "Just give me a minute, all right?" I whispered. I was weaker than I could ever remember being. How had he found an antidote for that poison? I expected to be dead. But he found a way to save me. I wasn't sure yet if I was happy to be alive or not. It meant I could avenge Jarek's death, but it also meant a life without him. Jarek's words whispered through my mind again. He said I had to stop them. Stop them and use him. Had he meant Aiden? He was a healer. What use would he be to me in taking out Mariana and her new assassin? I gripped the porch railing until splinters bit into my hands. That assassin bastard. I strained to remember everything from the moment I came to in Jarek's study, but the images were foggy. My escape was a bit more vivid. I remembered being in the truck and driving into the darkness. There was no memory of the crash. "Iona?" Aiden asked. I stiffened. Had I told him my name? "How do you know who I am?" I asked, bracing to attack if he wasn't simply a healer. He could be one of Mariana's many spies, for all I knew. I still had no idea where I was or how he'd found me. I thought I'd been in the middle of nowhere. "A friend of mine who helped me treat you, she recognized you as King Jarek's head guard." "The late King Jarek," he added quietly. "I'm sorry." "We all are," the goblin behind Aiden said as he lifted his mug in salute. "He was a good fi. And now he's a dead fi." My words ripped through me like a knife, but I didn't show the pain, not to these two unknowns. I have to go back. Go back? Aiden shook his head and rushed to block the porch steps, though I had yet to make a move for them. You're still healing. The poison nearly killed you. Rest is what you need right now. I've already wasted too much time. I need to find his killer. He held out his hands and blocked me from moving at all this time. It didn't appear like he knew how to fight. The last time I'd attacked him, he hadn't been able to fend me off. With as weak as I was right now, I doubted I'd be able to get past him. The hesitation in his eyes said he thought I could still wipe the porch with him. You can't go back there. You can't really go anywhere. He's right, the goblin said. You should listen to him. It's not safe for you right now. What are you talking about? I need to track down Jarek's killer. I shoved at Aiden. He barely moved, and his eyes widened in surprise. Don't flatter yourself, healer. It's the poison. His lips twitched in a brief smile. A worried frown took its place. You don't know what it's like out there. Leaving now will be a death sentence. You need to stay out of sight. Why? I went to shove him again, and then I spotted the bruising around his neck. They were a day old, maybe 2. Did I do that? I hadn't remembered that. It was possible, if I was in the grip of such a harsh poison. Oh no, that wasn't you. He cleared his throat, rubbing the bruises gingerly. 5 guards came looking for you. We managed to hide you from them, but needless to say, they think you were here at some point. You got those protecting me? Why didn't you just hand me over? Henson wouldn't have attacked a healer. It could have been another guard who'd lost his temper. I could have been in custody already. Granted, I'd most likely be dead, but still. I'd be closer to the ones who killed Jarek. You're wanted for the murder of King Jarek, Aiden stated. The Phi in charge is not a good guy. I wasn't about to hand you over, not after what you told me. Wait, you said I'm wanted? Treason, he said. They're telling everyone you killed the king. That you turned on him. I acted without thinking. My hands fisted in Aiden's shirt, and I spun him around, slamming him into the front porch railing. I did not kill him, I said through gritted teeth. I know, he said, not fighting against me. He waved the goblin off when he moved to break us apart. I know, Iona. I believe you. Why? Why do you believe me? I demanded. Anyone else would have simply handed me over, but he risked his life and those of his friends for a stranger. What do you gain from hiding me out here? What game are you playing? No game. I'm just the healer who found you on the road. He reached for my hands and gently unwound them from his shirt. You're not a killer, Iona. I scoffed and yanked my hands away. You don't know anything about me. I know you're still recovering. I know the entire royal guard is hunting for you and blaming you for a death that wasn't your fault. He was wrong. It was my fault. Voices shouted accusations inside my mind as Aiden's face swam in and out of view. I pushed past him hard enough to make him move and bolted off the steps. Gravel bit at my feet. Woods surrounded the cabin. Aiden called to me, but I hardly heard him over the din of shouting taking over my mind. I took off in a random direction, dodging trees and tripping over roots jutting out of the ground. A branch caught me in the face, but I continued on, blood dripping down my cheek. My foot caught on a stone and sent me sprawling through the underbrush. I smashed my head on a boulder. Darkness came over me. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the nightmare. As the scene played out again, the undeniable truth hit me. This was real. I came to in Jarek's study. Everything was blurry, and the voices around me were muffled. Jarek's yell cut through the haze. He was standing a few feet ahead of me. A figure stood behind him, holding a dagger to his throat. Jarek attempted to get to me, but the dagger cut into his neck. Don't, a male voice snapped from behind Jarek. We don't want this to happen too quickly. Jarek's hands fisted at his sides. I pushed to my feet, woozy. A sharp stinging started at the back of my neck. Drugged. The bastard drugged me. My hands went to my hips, but my blades weren't there. Looking for these? I squinted, then growled to find my dagger was being used to hold Jarek hostage. Back away from him now, unless you want to die. The figure remained hidden in shadow, but the hair on the back of my neck stood. I knew exactly who he was. Venkalth. His evil laughter filled the study. Iona. You remember me. Hard not to. You really think you can come in here and murder the king? He sighed. His face over Jarek's shoulder was pale, those eyes filled with malice. Who said I was going to kill him? I mean, I am going to kill him, but alas, it won't be me they blame. Iona, behind you, Jarek shouted just as something bashed into my head. I grunted and whirled around, claws swiping at someone's face. I struck skin, and he cursed as he staggered back. I went after him, but hands reached out and grabbed hold of me. They slammed me into the floor, kicking me in the gut, avoiding my face. Jarek yelled again. And then Venkalth was bellowing. I spotted their figures through the legs of the Phi beating me down. They fought over the dagger, then Jarek was free. He barreled into the Phi around me, and hoisted me upright. Venkalth was right behind him. I threw Jarek aside, and just barely missed being stabbed by my own dagger. I grabbed Venkalth's wrist and spun him around into the wall. He sputtered curses as he came at me with both daggers. They slashed through the air, but I was too fast. I kicked out his feet and sent him crashing to the floor. I reached for Jarek's hand and made to drag him out the door when it suddenly slammed shut in front of us. A key rattled in the lock from the outside. I bashed into it with Jarek, but it wouldn't budge. I was about to take us out the window when Jarek grabbed hold of me and threw me to the side. He gasped a split second later. I pushed off the floor, eyes wide in horror to see my dagger protruding from his chest. No, I whispered, then shouted as I bolted to him. No. Hands stopped me from reaching Jarek as he sank to his knees. Blood stained his shirt. Venkalth stepped behind him, placed the second dagger to Jarek's throat. Long live the king, Venkalth whispered. Iona, Jarek breathed as I continued to fight to get to him. I love you. I screamed as Venkalth dragged the dagger across his throat. Jarek bled out right before my eyes. There was another sharp prick at the back of my neck, and then I was falling over, watching Jarek's body topple down beside me. Iona? Can you hear me? Gentle hands held me upright. Iona, open your eyes. Dead, I gasped as pain exploded through my chest. He's dead. I know. No, you don't, I cried viciously, trying to get away. It was Aiden beside me. His caring eyes filled with worry as I continued to attempt to push off him. This time he wrapped his arms around me, holding me in place. It's my fault, I ranted. It's all my fault. It should have been me. What are you talking about? The fight, I remember the fight. I sucked in air, shaking my head as those final moments replayed. Whatever the second drug they dosed me with must have made me forget, but I remembered now. Venkalth. He had Jarek. We fought. We were almost out of there, then he threw me aside and took the blow meant for me. He died because of me. You said they were there to assassinate him. They would have killed him either way. It's not your fault. You don't know anything. Anything. I made to stand, but my feet wouldn't respond to my commands. Aiden was brushing my hair aside. I winced. Sorry. You hit your head. Might need stitches. I'm fine. Yeah, sure. Let me just leave you out here to die after I spent a week saving your life, he snapped. It was the first time I heard the healer raise his voice. His cheeks reddened and he coughed. Sorry. It's been a rough week. You think? Those gentle eyes hardened, and then his gaze flicked to something behind me. His resolve seemed to stiffen as he helped me to my feet and supported me as we walked back to his cabin. He'd seen something, but when I looked, there were only trees. You don't have to do this, I told him, fighting back the urge to break down completely. I was head of the royal guard, and at the highest rank of my guild. I did not break down. I did not sob and cry on the shoulder of a stranger, no matter much I wanted to. I swallowed back the agony of Jarek's loss, and focused on my anger instead. Never said I did, but it's what I'm doing, so deal with it. So you've got a feisty side after all, I mused. That small smile appeared for a second. When the need arises. We were a few yards away from the front porch where the older goblin sat, drinking his coffee. Iona, I know you want to charge out there and kill quite a few people, but I'm going to ask you to wait. I might not understand exactly what you're going through, but you're not strong enough for what you're planning. And when will I be? I don't know. All I ask is that you give yourself time to heal. Physically and mentally. His last words had me tilting my head. Did he know about me and Jarek? He couldn't. No one aside from Henson knew the truth. Mariana could have spread rumors, but how would they reach a healer who resided in the middle of nowhere? 3 days, he said suddenly. 3 days for what? Give me 3 days of watching over you to ensure the poison is truly gone, and then you can go kill whoever you need to. I was about to say hell no, when Jarek's voice whispered in my ear, do it, Iona. Typical. Even in death, he was finding ways to drive me crazy. Deal, I said. But no more. Aiden seemed pleased enough with that answer. I rolled my eyes at him. I'd need to find new weapons anyway. As he turned back toward the cabin, I spotted those bruises on his neck again. The guards who came here, did you recognize any of them? Get a name? No, but the one who did this wore all white with a black coat. Shit. I ran a hand over my face. You tricked him into thinking I wasn't here? Not sure he fully believed me, but yeah. I did. Why? Who is he? He's the one who poisoned me, I informed him as my anger reached a new level. And he's the one who killed Jarek. Now, I'm going to make him wish he was never born. I stormed past Aiden and into the cabin, mind turning as I worked on how I was going to kill Venkouth before he hurt anyone else.
Chapter 8. Aiden. Iona's head wound did not require stitches, but all the same, I wasn't keen on letting her fall asleep for a few hours afterward. Orion hung around even when I told him he could go. He seemed intrigued by Iona, and after a while began asking her questions while I cleaned up my mess of a cabin. I hadn't expected her to respond, but after a few minutes of tense silence, she gave him one-word answers. I listened in, trying to make it look like I wasn't. I arranged books on the shelves, putting them back in order by subject, then by author. Orion's first few questions were about Iona, and whether she had any family. Those were very short, quick answers. Sounded like she had no parents and no siblings. She became part of the Fighters Guild when she was very young. Even younger than when I joined the Healers Guild. It's the only life I've known, she said quietly. I glanced over my shoulder. She was curled up on the couch, her petite frame appearing even smaller as she stared out the front window. I was chosen to become a guard. How did you become head guard? Orion asked. That is a great honor. As a half-goblin, I'm sure it wasn't easy. It wasn't. I was lucky they even allowed me on royal grounds, let alone permit me to guard the king. Our guild leader had a hand in my placement, she told him. But it was Jarek himself who made me his head guard. You must have given him a good reason. I saved his life. This time I did turn all the way around. The sadness in her words was too much for me to act like I wasn't paying attention. Iona picked at a thread on my worn couch, not making eye contact with either of us. His motorcade was attacked. The rest of the guards were killed. I managed to keep him alive until backup came. She explained it like she was delivering a report, but her dark eyes overflowed with the weight of what she lost. The next week, he appointed me his head bodyguard against the wishes of his council. And well, that's what I've been doing ever since. Orion smiled gently as he settled back in the black threadbare armchair. Then you found more than you both bargained for. Am I right? Iona glared, and I tensed, ready to throw myself between her and the old goblin. She made no move to attack him, but the intent was on her face. Don't. No one is going to judge you here, he assured her. It's tragic what happened to him, and I am deeply sorry for what you've lost. I think you and Jarek together would have brought this kingdom into a new age for all Fae and goblins. Well, it looks like that's not going to happen. You know why? Because he fell in love with someone like me, she snapped sarcastically and pushed off the couch. That's the only reason he's dead. Not because of the policies he was trying to push through, but because he practically told his council that he found a wife. Someone knew it was me, and they hired Venkalf to kill him. Her lip twitched as she stared Orion down, as though daring him to say anything else. The tension grew until my phone rang. I jumped at the harsh ring, then quickly reached for it on the work table. Yeah. Aiden, I hope you're not busy, Matilda said, sounding shaken. It's Felicity and the other kids. What do you mean? What's wrong? She woke this morning with a fever. It's only gotten worse. 4 others have it now too, but we don't think it's the pox. I'm not sure what it is. None of them stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time, she rambled. Matilda, take a deep breath. I'll be there as fast as I can, all right? Thank you, Aiden. I hung up and snatched up my leather healer bag. I searched through the tonics and bombs, but I had no idea what I was dealing with. I grabbed handfuls of every herb and ingredient I had, tossing them haphazardly into the bag. Aiden, what is it? Orion asked. Matilda said the kids are falling ill again, I muttered, kicking myself for thinking I'd cured them. Don't think they had the pox after all. Or maybe it's a new strain. I don't know, but I have to get to them. I trailed off when I spotted Iona out of the corner of my eye. She seemed curious as she watched me. If I leave, will you give me your word that you'll stay here and not run off to get yourself killed? Where are you going? Timber Falls, Orion answered for me. You know it? Iona nodded slowly. Heard of it. The way she said it told me she'd done more than that. Had she been there before? When she was growing up? She was a half-goblin. She would have been welcome in most goblin communities, since many Fae wouldn't accept her. I'll come with you, she said, surprising me. It must have shown because she crossed her arms and arched her brow. What? Don't trust me around your precious charges. As long as they're not behind Jarek's death, I'm not a threat to them. Staying here would be better. Keep you out of sight. I know Venkalf far better than you do. If he's going to look for me anywhere, it'll be here. I'm safer in a crowd I can easily disappear into, she argued. You still need to rest. What do you think I'm going to do in Timber Falls? Run around and interrogate a bunch of innocent goblins. Besides, you look like you've got your hands full. She shrugged and glanced around the cabin. Be nice to get out of this place for a bit too. No offense. None taken. Mind grabbing that other bag by the door? She did as I asked, while Orion joined me at the work table. I expected him to tell me this was a horrible idea, taking the unstable half-goblin to his town. He hummed quietly to himself as he gathered more ingredients, then said he was going to check the garden for more of the herbs I'd need. I watched him go, wondering what the old goblin was up to. You think they'll have spare boots in Timber Falls? And new clothes? Iona asked, as she dropped the empty leather satchel at my feet. I'm sure we can find you something. You sure you're up for this? Aiden, if you ask me that every 5 minutes, you're going to be talking with a fat lip the rest of the day, she warned with a completely straight face. I couldn't tell if she was kidding or not. Right, sorry. Habit. No problem. I'm not exactly used to having someone looking out for me like this. Jarek used to give me shit for it too. She cleared her throat roughly as she picked up a vial filled with crushed beetles. You need this too. Wouldn't hurt. I rustled through the dried herbs hanging over my head and cut down some sprigs. Didn't the other guards look out for you? Sort of like a family. You met some of them. You tell me if any of them would have cared for me. But Jarek did. The glass she'd been holding shattered. She breathed heavily through her nose, glaring at the floor. Iona, I'm sorry. It's fine. I'll wait for you outside. She hurried out the door just as Orion was walking back in. Well, looks like things are going well, he teased as he handed over the fresh herbs. I don't know what to say to her. She's not like any other woman I've met. Yes, I've noticed. He clapped me on the shoulder. She needs time. She just lost the man she loves and blames herself for his death. Survivor's guilt. Think she wishes I would have let her die. She probably will for a while. You just have to make sure she doesn't succumb to those feelings. I closed both satchels and set them by the front door. I walked into the back room to grab a fresh shirt and my boots. And how am I supposed to do that? She could kick my ass with one hand tied behind her back. I sat on the edge of the bed. Orion chuckled as he stood in the doorway. I'd pay to see that. Thanks, really. She's in a difficult situation. Someone's framed her for the murder of the king. She probably believes she's alone. I sighed as I tugged on my second boot, then yanked my jeans down over it. I'm just a healer. And you perform miracles all the time. Don't argue with me on that point. Part of my job. Dealing with politics. Murders? This isn't my area of expertise. Why do you care so much about her anyway? She should be on the run, I whispered as I peered out the front window. Iona waited by the truck for us. It's what I'd be doing. No, her place is in Charus, he said with a firm nod. That half-goblin has a great future ahead of her. And how would you know that? Something you're not telling me. I meant it as a joke, but when Orion didn't crack a smile, I frowned. Some goblins were known to have the sight, but if he had it, he never shared that information. We all have our secrets, he replied. I've told you plenty of times, you are far more than just a healer. In time, you'll understand that. He walked outside to join Iona by the truck. Halfway there, he was overtaken by a coughing fit. Iona helped him stay upright, but he waved her off with a smile. I wondered if he was still spitting up blood, even after the tonic I'd given him. Once I saw to the kids in Timber Falls, I'd have to mix him up something different. Stronger. I had a feeling we were going to need Orion for whatever might come next. I parked the truck, and the three of us piled out. Iona helped me with the leather satchels as I rushed toward the clinic. A group of concerned goblins was crowded around outside. They let us through. I assessed Felicity and the 6 other goblin kids huddled on cots. Their gray skin was pale and covered in sweat. Many had rashes running down their arms and up their necks to their cheeks. Do they all have fevers? I asked, falling into healer mode. Yes, nothing seems to bring them down, Matilda told me. Teresa was there too, talking quietly to a mother holding her young son. What's wrong with them? Iona asked quietly. The stern guard who had woken up in my cabin this morning was gone, replaced by a very worried half-goblin. The way she stared at the kids had me wondering if she'd lost a sibling when she was younger and neglected to tell us. Or worse, had she had a kid of her own at some point? She looked about my age. Figured it was possible. I'm not sure yet, I said as I rushed to drag out everything I brought with me. I thought it was the pox, but this is different. Can you help them? It's what I do. I'll help you if I can. Least I can do since you saved my life. I handed her the dried herbs, followed by a mortar and pestle. Crush these as fine as you can. Once you finish with those, there's more in the bag there. She did as I asked and set to work. I started with Felicity, taking her temperature and seeing how bad the rash was. Her skin was cracked in some places, and she could hardly move, she was in so much pain. It seemed to be in her joints, too. I gave her the fever reducer, followed by some soothing ointments to help with the rawness of her skin. Her pulse was fast, but her breathing sounded fine. The rest of the kids were the same. I muttered under my breath, trying to figure out what it could be. Without even thinking, I started asking for herbs and tonics, then laid out how they should be mixed. I thought it was Teresa doing it all for me, but when I finally looked up, I found Iona at the work table, hair pulled back in a loose bun, mixing up 6 vials of the concoction I wanted to try. She handed them to me without a word. She didn't even look at me, she was so focused. I gave each sick child a tonic and waited. "How long till you know if it worked?" Iona whispered as I retreated to the work table. "Could be minutes. Could be hours. Depends on if I got it right." "You know what this is?" "Possibly. I saw a case like this a few months back, but it was only one kid. He came down with the same horrible rash and fever. The achy joints came a few days later, though. I washed out the bowls in the sink nearby. It took me nearly a week to nail down his symptoms and treat them all effectively. Hopefully this time I've caught it faster." "But he lived, right?" "He did, but it was close. Too damn close." Her hand rested on my arm with the healer's mark. "You saved me from Reaper venom, Aiden. I don't think you give yourself enough credit." "Yeah, I'm told that a lot. Maybe you should start listening." Her eyes flicked to where her hand rested, and she pulled it back. "One of these days, you'll have to give me the real reason why you didn't just let me die. It's not in my nature to let death win. You can keep telling me that, but it's not the truth." "So, clothes," she said in a rush, as if she suddenly wanted to get away from me. "Where might I find those?" "There's a general store a few doors down." She started to walk away, then cursed. "I don't have any money on me." "Tell them to put it on my tab." "It's fine, really." From the way her lip twitched, it made her uncomfortable to keep accepting any more kindness from me. When she looked ready to argue, I turned my back on her. That seemed to work better than arguing. A few seconds later, she was gone. Teresa took her place. "She seems to be doing much better," she said. "She's alive. I'm not sure how, but she is." "Take the win, Aiden. I think the kids are coming around too." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands as I turned to face the room. Felicity was smiling at her parents. The rest of the kids were also sitting up and laughing. It had worked that fast with the boy too. I sighed in relief. When Matilda called, I was terrified it was another strain of the pox. I whispered to Teresa. "Is there one?" "Some of the healers are seeing it further south. With so many goblins passing through Charus from Jolian, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up here." "Damn it. Because we don't have enough issues." "It'll be all right. With any luck, we'll catch it in time." I rested against the work table and smiled at the recovering kids. I'd stick around for the night to make sure there weren't any ill effects. Might be good for Iona to be around more goblins too. With any luck, Matilda or Teresa might get her to open up. She was far from all right, and if she wasn't going to talk to me about Jarek, she needed to speak with someone else. I debated on telling her about seeing his spirit, but after learning how he died and her part in it, I sensed that would hurt more than help. Once the kids were free of the fever and up and running around the clinic as if they hadn't even been sick, Teresa helped me make a second round of the tonic in a larger batch. Just in case. I'd have to reach out to the other healers and see if they were having the same cases in their goblin communities. A couple of hours after we arrived, I exited the clinic for some fresh air. Teresa said she was going to check on Orion and see about getting some food. I'd stay in the clinic like always, and there were plenty of beds for Iona to do the same. I didn't see her out on Main Street anywhere, and was going to check out the general store when 4 black SUVs floored it into town. I jumped back to the sidewalk as they slammed on their brakes in the middle of the road. The goblins stopped and stared until the doors flew open and unloaded their load of royal guards. 12 swarmed onto the streets. Luckily, none of them were Venkalth. Still, that didn't mean someone else might not recognize Iona. "Spread out," one of the guards shouted. "Search the entire town." "Can I help you?" I rushed forward. "What are you doing here?" The Phi was my height, but had a good 30 pounds of muscle over me. A sidearm was strapped to his hip. His hand twitched to it as he gave me a good once-over. "I should ask you the same." "I'm a healer. Timber Falls is one of the communities I take care of." The other guards spread out and were shoving goblins out of their way. They barged into businesses, tossing anyone inside out to the street. I took a step forward to stop it, but the guard grabbed my shoulder, digging his fingers in hard enough to bruise. "Stay right where you are, healer. We've been warned about you." "What's that supposed to mean?" I snapped and shoved at his hand. "I've done nothing wrong." "Not yet, but you're under suspicion for harboring a traitor." "I've done no such thing, and you have no proof." A scream came from my right. I whirled around to see Teresa being thrown to the street. Henry shouted at the guard that had hurled her, until a gun was aimed at his face. More goblins stood beside Henry as more took to the streets. The guards were outnumbered, but they had the guns. We didn't. The door to the clinic opened, and I shouted for them all to get back inside and barricade the door. "Why?" the guard demanded, his hand on his pistol. "Who's inside?" I threw my arms out to block him from getting to the clinic door. "Kids who are sick and need to be left alone." "Or the traitor." "She's not in there." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Who said it was a she?" My jaw dropped open a bit at his stupidity. "You all did, the last time you confronted me about harboring criminals." He took a step toward me, but I didn't budge. "You're not getting inside. I'll not have you terrorizing those kids while they're on the mend." "What are you going to do about it, healer?" Down the street, Henry was still having a stare-down with the other guard. Teresa was on her knees on the pavement, 2 guards on either side of her, as if she was a threat. Orion was amongst the group standing with Henry. Any second, one of these idiots was going to pull the trigger, and it'd be a bloodbath. "Stand aside," the guard ordered. I gritted my teeth as I shook my head. "Not happening." "Then I'm going to arrest you for getting in the way. Move it, healer, now." "I won't ask again." He unholstered his pistol and glared with violet eyes. "I'm waiting." Just as I was about to tell him to buzz off, a yelp came from across the street. All the guards spun around, guns aimed. One of their numbers was on the ground. Blood spattered the concrete around him. I couldn't tell what had taken him out. "Who did it?" the guard shouted as he turned his back to me. "Who?" "I didn't see anything," another guard yelled. The others nodded in agreement. The head guard aimed his gun back at me, clenching his jaw furiously. "Where is she?" I never had a chance to answer when another panicked yell that was quickly cut off. The other guards hustled around the SUVs, blocking their view of the opposite sidewalk. A body flew over the top of one a second later. There were gunshots. Goblins sprinted away with heads ducked low. A second guard landed atop the SUV, his eyes wide open, a bullet hole in the center of his forehead. "What is this?" the guard shouted. "Get over there." The other guards hesitated, but followed his order. More gunshots rang out, and then I was ducking for cover. Bullets struck the clinic walls behind me. I motioned for those inside to take cover as windows shattered, and screams filled the air. Out of the 12 guards that had pulled up, I only counted 6 left standing. A blur caught my eye, and then a 7th guard was on the ground, his throat slashed. He gurgled as he died. The guard in front of me shot wildly in that direction. The others closed in ranks around him, forming a line. Another guard grunted and hit the pavement. A flaming dagger protruded from his heart. I blinked, confused at the sight, but there wasn't time to understand what was happening. A second dagger soared through the air and hit another guard. He crashed into the SUV, but was still standing. He yanked the dagger free, only to have another one slam into his forehead. 3 guards remained. They started to fire again, aiming for the alleyway and the only place someone could be hiding. When their guns clicked empty, they started to reach for more magazines. A mad cackle echoed down the street. Really? This is all they sent after me? You worthless lot? Come out, bitch, the head guard yelled as he slid the new magazine home. We're supposed to bring you in alive. Oh yeah. On whose orders? Iona called back. That's for you to find out. The guard motioned the other 2 forward, opting to stay behind and cover them, it seemed. They appeared apprehensive, but he pointed his gun at them, and they hustled toward the alley. I crawled a bit further down the sidewalk as my curiosity got the better of me. The 2 guards reached the alley. A hand reached out and yanked one inside. The other 5 fired his gun, and then he too disappeared. Damn it, the head guard cursed as his fingers fidgeted on his gun. You're hiding. Just like a coward, he shouted. You can't hide forever. He'll find you. A shot rang out, cutting off his words. He staggered back as the bullet struck his shoulder. While he was still recovering from the hit, a figure blurred down the street and smashed into him. The guard sailed back into the SUV as the gun was yanked from his hand and cast away. Iona followed up the first strike with another to his face. He blocked that but missed the kick to his gut. She grabbed him and spun him away from the SUV. She moved too fast for me to keep up with. She ducked around and under the guard's flailing efforts that seemed graceless compared her. She attacked with a fury, but it was controlled at the same time. She flipped the large fly over her back, and he landed hard on the asphalt. He scrambled for the gun on the ground, but she beat him to it, picked it up, then backed away from him, holding it firmly in both hands. Pathetic, she said with a disgusted twitch of her lip. He stayed on the ground as he sneered. You won't get away with this. With what? You and I both know I'm innocent. That's not what everyone else believes. Right now, you're the most wanted woman in Charus and Jolian. Iona's eyes narrowed as her finger tightened on the trigger. She opened her mouth to curse him or ask him questions. I wasn't sure. A shot pinged the SUV right next to her. She fell to one knee and spun at the same time. She fired 3 times, killing the guard who had emerged from the alley. He never had a chance and collapsed, dead. The head guard took his chance and threw himself into the nearest SUV. Iona fired at it as he jerked the wheel and sped down the street and out of Timber Falls. Damn it, she shouted when the gun clicked empty. She chucked it aside, then kicked the nearest dead guard. She planted her hands on her hips, muttering to herself. A second later, she was making for the other SUVs. What are you doing? I asked, quickly getting to my feet to follow. Going after him. I can't let him live. You sure about that? What if there's more of them? I asked, even as I glanced around at the dead bodies. All courtesy of her. It wasn't hard to see anymore how she earned such a high rank in her guild, or why she had been Jarek's head guard. I don't have a choice. She opened the driver's side door, but didn't get in. Iona. Shit, she mumbled. Her eyes rolled back and she fell over into my arms. I caught her but ended up on the ground with her in my lap. I tapped her cheeks hard. She grumbled but didn't come to. Told you it was too soon, I muttered. Damn stubborn woman. Aiden, Orion, Teresa and Henry came running around the SUV. Is she all right? She overdid it. She took them all out, Henry said, amazed. What do we do with her now? We keep her safe. We protect her, Orion stated. Aiden, take her to my cabin outside of town. We'll see to the bodies and the vehicles. No, I should take her back to my place. And I can't just leave you with dead guards. My boy, it's a bit late for that. If that Venkal sent his men here, I have no doubt he sent them to your place too. He handed me a set of keys. Get going. We can clean up this mess. No one else will die in Timber Falls. I wanted to keep disagreeing, but even Teresa and Henry both looked ready to argue with me if I tried to go anywhere but Orion's place. It was more secluded than mine, and with any luck, the guards didn't even know about it. With Henry's help, I picked up Iona and carried her back to my truck. As I was about to drive away, I rolled down the window and called to Henry. "Do me a favor and gather any daggers you find," I told him. "I have a feeling she might be wanting some sort of weapon when she wakes up." He said he'd see it done, and then I drove away from Timber Falls and into the woods. Iona shifted in her seat, her head resting against the window, but she didn't wake up. I'd seen her move fast when she went after me and Teresa, but this time she took down 12 guards on her own. I wouldn't be surprised if she slept for the next 2 days. I hadn't expected her to be up and walking around after being tormented by the Reaper venom, yet she had taken on 12 guards like it was nothing. "How am I supposed to keep you alive if you're running around doing crap like that?" I murmured, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. "Jarek is going to kill me." "What did you say?" I jumped at her question. I sensed her eyes on me as I struggled to find a reply. By the time I came up with something that might pass as the truth, she was passed out again. I blew out a breath, not sure if I'd get so lucky the next time she overheard me talking about Jarek. The real problem was going to be what would happen to Timber Falls. The guard would tell Venkalth and others what happened. They'd all be in danger now. Orion would have an evacuation plan in place. They'd all have to leave their homes. Iona would not be happy to hear that either when she woke. So much for today being an easy day.
Chapter 9. Iona. Now you're just slacking. I grumbled at Jarek's words. I never slack. That might be true, he said with a laugh. That was reckless. Did you want those guards to slaughter those innocent people? I asked. Or hurt those kids? You know I didn't, but you're important. You're one of the few who knows the truth. No, actually, I don't. All I know is someone hired Venkalth to kill you, and you threw yourself into a killing blow meant for me, I snapped, wanting to wake up from whatever dream or hallucination this was. I missed Jarek, but the last thing I needed was his voice inside my head lecturing me. Who said I was lecturing? I cursed and shifted. I was on something soft, but it wasn't a bed. A couch maybe. The smell was different from the herbs that filled Aiden's cabin. Probably a good thing we hadn't gone back there. If Venkalth sent men to Timber Falls, he probably had more waiting for Aiden to return to the cabin. Are you angry with me? You're in my head. You tell me. I opened my eyes and glanced around. It appeared to be a sitting room. Wooden walls, a few bookshelves that held trinkets instead of books. The top shelves were filled with framed photographs of Orion and other goblins. I recognized a few of them from the streets. One was the woman who had been thrown to the ground. The other was the woman from the clinic, the one Aiden called Matilda. Orion had mentioned he was the town elder. He hadn't been when I was growing up there. I was so different now, I doubted anyone remembered me. Not like I was there for long all those years ago. I swung my legs off the couch and rubbed my hands down my face, then through my tangled hair. What would you have had me do? Watch you die? Jarek whispered. I hung my head. The room was empty aside from myself. Guess it was possible I was simply going crazy, and not actually haunted by his spirit. Let me protect you, as was my duty. A duty I failed. When he started to whisper my name, I shook my head and snarled loudly. His voice faded away. A sharp pain stabbed me in the heart as it did, but I couldn't have him pulling away from my focus. Venkalth was hunting me down, and he'd kill anyone that got in his way. I had to figure out who he was hired by, then kill them both. My boots were sitting by the door. I picked them up, but didn't put them on so my steps would be quiet. I assumed I was in Orion's home. It would make sense. I crept out of the door and down the long stretch of hall. Several doors lined the hallway, all of them open. I poked my head inside each to find a simple bedroom. The beds appeared recently slept in. Apparently, he had a lot of guests. Voices reached me from the end of the hall, where a set of wooden stairs led downward. There was no way to sneak into the room with cathedral ceilings and a fire roaring away in a large stone hearth. A familiar head of silver hair was visible in a plaid armchair. Orion sat across from Aiden on a matching sofa, with his feet propped up on an ottoman. Neither appeared overly concerned about what had just happened in town. As soon as I started down, the steps creaked and both men turned. "Ah, you're awake. Good. Aiden can stop panicking." "I wasn't panicking," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," I answered shortly. "You should be panicking. Why aren't you both more worried? What about the goblins in town? Venkouth will send more guards." "It's already been taken care of," Orion assured me. "How? Not like you can arm the goblins." Aiden rested a hand on my shoulder. "Orion and other town elders in Charuz have contingency plans in case the Fae ever decided to turn on us. They've been evacuated to safe houses. Venkouth won't find them. You don't know him. He's not going to stop hunting me." "You're not leaving," he said quickly when I slipped on my boots and headed for the front door. "You just took down 12 guards alone and collapsed. You cannot go back out there right now." "I'm not going to fight." "Then what are you doing?" he demanded, using a tone I hadn't known the healer was capable of having. Then again, watching him stare down the barrel of a gun today was impressive. He was certainly not as useless as I first assumed. Jarek's grunt of annoyance inside my head caught me off guard, and I flinched. Aiden frowned. "Iona? If I'm going to stop Venkouth, I have to get a message to someone," I explained. "You've helped me enough, both of you. After today, I can't risk anyone else getting dragged into this bloody mess. It's mine to deal with. Not alone." Orion hefted himself out of his chair, coughing quietly as he did so. I'd seen the blood on his lips that morning. He was sick, very sick, and yet here he was still risking his life for his kin. "You are not alone in your anger and sorrow over Jarek's untimely death. We're going to help you, and before we stand here arguing about it with each other for hours, just accept it, eh?" he added with a wink. "Looks like for the moment, we're all you've got." He was right, and I hated it. "If you two get killed, you better not haunt me too." "Two." Aiden exchanged a glance with Orion. "Never mind. Doesn't matter. I have to get a message to the only guard I can still trust." "Are you sure you can?" I trusted Henson with my life, and the secret relationship I had with Jarek. That would never change. Besides, if couldn't trust him, then I was screwed. "Yes, I can." "How are you going to get a message to him?" "Fighter's Guild trick. You have any daggers by chance?" Aiden went to a satchel by the front door. "I had Henry collect them from the dead guards, on the off chance you would want a weapon. The guns were too risky to take. He brought me the whole bag. Does it matter they're not yours?" "Mine have been tainted," I said quietly, fighting back the lump in my throat as I saw my dagger plunge itself into Jarek's chest all over again. "These will do." I pulled out a long, thin blade that was most like the ones I used. The fire burning hot in the hearth would work well enough for what I needed. Gripping the dagger in my hand, I closed my eyes and focused on my message. Once I had the words aligned in my head, I squeezed the blade of the dagger just enough to draw blood. "Iona," Aiden said, worried. "I'm all right." "All part of the plan," I told him, then felt the blade grow hot. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop from wincing. When the blade cooled, I held it out to show them the words inscribed in code on the blade. "That should do it." "How are you going to get that to him?" Orion asked. "Like this." I held out my open hand to the fire, whispering words I was taught so many years ago. How to contact another in the guild. The fire shifted from orange to violet. I tossed the dagger into the heart of the fire. The flames wrapped around it from hilt to the tip, and when they cleared, the blade was gone. It'll find its way to Henson soon enough. What did you tell him? I wasn't sure how they would take the news, but if they were serious about helping me, there was no use lying. Both had proven they weren't just going to turn me over to the guards for their gain. Aiden wasn't telling me the truth about why he hadn't, but I'd get it out of him eventually. I told him I'm alive and gave him a mission to complete. We'll need to get to the designated location by midnight. The clock above the hearth read 9:30. Where are we exactly? Orion gave me directions from Timber Falls. I mapped it out in my head. Where are you meeting this guard of yours? He asked. Not too far away, but we should head out soon. I don't want to miss him in case he gets there early. What mission did you give him? I pulled my hair back in a bun as I told Aiden, you'll find out once we get there. Let's get moving. Once my hair was fixed, I removed more daggers from the bag and tucked 2 in the laces of my boots. I didn't have any sheaths on me, so this would have to do for now. And I stopped to reassure myself. Henson was smart. He wouldn't let himself be followed. Venkouth was smarter though, and that Phi had it out for me. I wasn't going to take any chances of being caught off guard. The full moon lit up the clearing as we waited for midnight and Henson's arrival. It hadn't taken us long to get here. I'd hoped some of my anxiety would fade, but it grew worse. I flipped a flaming dagger end over end, pacing in front of Aiden's red truck. He sat on the tailgate, watching me, as if worried I was either going to go nuts or collapse. We've got time, he repeated. Why don't you sit down and conserve your energy? I'm fine. Iona, he said, and when I glanced over I found him scowling at me. That look might work on his more stubborn patience, but it did nothing to me. Fine, whatever, pace away. I tossed the dagger end over end one more time, then sighed. I walked to the tailgate and hopped up, so I sat beside him, the dagger still flaming in my hand. There. Happy? He studied the fire as it roamed over the blade. May I? I handed it over hilt first. The fire stayed on the blade for a few seconds, then went out. He ran his fingers over the steel, shaking his head. What? You don't approve? It's not that. I was just never one for causing harm. They tried my parents. Both were in the Fighters Guild. As were my 3 siblings, but not me. I'm the black sheep of the family. We all can't be killers. Someone has to keep our asses alive. He smiled softly. Be nice if my family would see it that way. I've spent so much of my life trying to gain their approval, until I decided I wanted nothing to do with them or the Fighters Guild. If they couldn't understand what I did and why, what was the point? You turned out all right, I told him. Look at all the good you do for the goblins. Hell, you saved my life from Reaper venom. I don't think there's another healer who can say that. He handed back the dagger. No, but that won't matter to them. Makes you feel any better, the guild will disown me if I can't clear my name. If I don't end up dead at Venkouth's hand, someone else will do it. I'll be a mark of shame on them, until someone gets lucky. Even if you're innocent? The evidence all points to the contrary. Everyone believes I killed the king. I placed the dagger in my boot and hopped off the tailgate, unable to sit still. All that matters now is avenging his death. And afterward? If you succeed? What will you do then? One step at a time. In truth, I had no idea what I'd do. Probably turn into a hermit, go travel the world. Get as far away from Charuz as I could. There was no point in me sticking around without Jarek here. I was surrounded by too many memories that would just continue to haunt me. I left my dagger in my boot, but went back to pacing. On one of my turnarounds, I took my time observing Aiden and his head of silver hair. The moonlight brought out the different tones of white and silver in the strands. His hair color didn't age him, only brought out his attractive features. Whereas Jarek had a stern jawline with a thick beard, Aiden's face was smooth with high cheekbones and softer features. They didn't make him look weak, far from it. The two Phi couldn't be more different, but unlike Jarek, I couldn't quite figure this healer out. His brow arched suddenly and his lips twitched. What? He shook his head. Nothing, just wondering why you're staring. Your silver hair, how did you get it? You don't think I was born with it? I shrugged. Were you? If he wanted me to stop pacing around like a mad woman, he needed to help me out here and distract me. I crossed my arms and waited. It was a mishap about 10 years ago, he explained, holding up a strand of it. I was working on an antidote for another poison that's said to be quite difficult to save anyone from. I mixed the wrong ingredients, and let's just say, that's not my first cabin. You blew it up. Sky high. Changed my hair to silver. I only survived because Orion was in the area and saw it go up. He dragged me out. Saved my life. Wait. How long have you been on your own? Goblins and Fae aged slowly. We didn't exactly count years as humans did. By our standards, I was still in my early 20s. Though in reality, I was closer to my 30s. I guessed Aiden was the same. I'd say 25 years now. Been a long while, he mused with a sad smile. You've done quite well for yourself. You should be proud. I meant it too. Aiden was beyond and impressive as a healer. He was calm under pressure, and he'd saved me from Reaper venom. It was said to have no antidote, and somehow he came up with one. Wherever his family was, I hoped one day they'd see their son was incredible. What about you? He asked. What about me? I know you told Orion you didn't have any family, but where did you grow up? I picked at my tiny black claws as I avoided his inquisitive stare. All over. I bounced around for a while until the guild found me and took me in. They trained me. They became my family. Do you know what happened to them? Your parents, I mean. Died when I was little, as far as anyone remembers. I shrugged as I forced a smile to my face. He looked ready to keep asking questions I was going to have to do better at avoiding, when sticks and leaves crunched behind me. I drew a dagger and turned my back to Aiden. Don't move, I told him. It's Henson, right? Might not be. I'm not taking any chances until I see him. Headlights bounced off the trees. A black truck appeared. It parked at the edge of the clearing and killed the engine. The door opened, and I held my breath, half expecting to see Venkouth step out. When Henson appeared around the door, a huge smile of relief on his face, I dropped the dagger back into my boot. Iona, he muttered, and then he was embracing me. I hugged him back, fighting back the wave of emotions that wanted to burst forth. I thought you were dead. There was no word. What the hell happened? It's a long story, I told him as I glanced behind him. One that I'll be sure to tell you once business is taken care of. Did you get him? Get who? Aiden asked. Henson tensed. You sure you can trust him? Never seen him before. I motioned for him to stand down. This is Aiden. He's a healer and you should thank him. He's the only reason I'm alive. Aiden held out his hand for a shake, a tentative smile on his face. Henson ignored his hand and wrapped him up in a bear hug that his eyes bug out of his head. Oh, all right then. Thank you, Henson said as he set him back on his feet. He turned back to me, looking as pissed as off as I felt. Mariana is telling anyone who will listen that she saw you murder Jarek. The entire kingdom's up in arms over it. There's a bounty on your head. I figured as much when Venkouth came looking for me. Henson cursed. He's after you? Like I said, long story. Where's our guest of honor? Henson said he'd go grab him as Aiden stepped up beside me. Iona, who did you have him bring here? I crossed my arms as Henson opened the back door of the truck and dragged out a figure clad in the black gear of a royal guard. Someone who's about to give us all the answers we've been missing. I clicked my claws against each other as the guard was dragged forward. Henson shoved him to his knees, then removed the black bag covering his head. He glared around until his eyes landed on my face. He lunged at me. His angry shouts cut off by the duct tape over his mouth. His hands were bound behind his back, and Henson easily grabbed him and threw him back to the ground. "Stay down, Eric, if you know what's good for you." The guard glowered at us. He stopped yelling at least. I crouched in front of him as I drew one of my daggers. Flames appeared on the blade as the tattoo on my arm warmed and glowed a deep orange. I placed the tip at his chin. He leaned back to get away. "Iona?" Aiden asked uncertainly. "Let me introduce you to the head of Princess Mariana's personal guard," I told Aiden. "The man who's going to tell us everything about what that bitch is up to if he wants to live." Eric's eyes widened in fear for a heartbeat until they narrowed in resolve. It didn't matter. I'd broken plenty of Phi in my day. Eric would be no different. I smiled darkly as I dragged the tip of the dagger down his neck to the hollow of his neck. "Let's get started."
Chapter 10. Aiden. The second Henson arrived with Eric in tow, a change came over Iona. Gone was any hint of a softer side, and back was the steely-faced guard, who was ready to kick Eric's Phi ass from here to next year if he didn't answer her questions. She hadn't removed her flaming dagger from underneath his chin yet. The moonlight caught the malicious glint in her dark eyes. "Iona," I started. She held up her hand. "Not now, Aiden. Shouldn't we go somewhere else?" "Oh no. Here's just fine," she mused, running the tip of the dagger down Eric's cheek as Henson held him upright. "Here, no one can hear him scream. Now you're going to tell me what Princess Mariana is up to." Eric grunted, and his eyes narrowed. "I'm going to remove the tape. Keep your mouth shut unless you're asked questions." Iona grabbed the corner of the tape and yanked it free. Eric spat and immediately spewed curses at her. She backhanded him hard enough to send him to the ground. Henson helpfully righted him, and as Eric opened his mouth a second time, Iona punched him. His head flew back and blood spurted from his nose. "Did you not hear me?" I took a step forward, not even sure what I intended to do. "What are you doing?" "Stay out of this, Aiden," Iona warned, not even glancing my way. "Are you going to torture him?" "If I have to, yes." I licked my lips, knowing full well if I got in her way, she'd shove me aside. This wasn't right, though. I couldn't stand by while she beat a man to death. While I was still figuring out what I was going to do, a sharp crack of skin against skin made me jump. Iona had backhanded Eric again. He fell to the side, spewing curses about how he was going to make Iona pay. All she did was sigh and pick at her small claws. "This would be a lot less painful for you if you would simply do as you're told. You going to keep whining, or are you going to cooperate?" Henson grabbed the Phi by his hair and yanked his head back, exposing his neck. Iona aimed the dagger at his jugular, and Eric stilled. "Bitch," he seethed. "So I've been told. Back to Mariana. Did she hire Venkalth?" Eric ground his teeth as I waited with bated breath for him to answer Iona's question. When he shook his head, Iona hung hers. She brought back her hand with the dagger, and just as she was about to slash it down the Phi's front, I rushed in. She barely jerked her hand back in time. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped and grabbed me by my shirt. "Get out of my way." Her eyes were so dark with her anger, they were nearly black. I held up my hands, reminding her I was unarmed. "Is this really the best option?" "What do you want me to do?" she asked in a whisper that was more intimidating than if she had been yelling. "He's a trained guard just like I am." "You want me to what? Sit him down, offer him a cup of coffee? You think that'll get him to talk? Isn't it worth a try to be civil? You're acting like the monster they're portraying you, as if you do this." Her face screwed up in annoyance, and she shoved me aside. "You know nothing about who we are. Guards swear loyalty for life. He's not about to give up information on Mariana, not without a fight." "You don't know that," I argued as I scrambled back up. "Actually, I do, because I wouldn't give up intel on Jarek either. It's what we're trained for. And I was trained to save people, not watch them be beaten to a bloody pulp." My words reverberated around the clearing. Henson's face remained blank. Iona's did too, as she approached me. I gulped as she raised the dagger, the flames flaring brighter along its blade and lighting up her face. And I was trained to kill. Stand down, Aiden. I won't ask you again. She turned from me to Eric, who was now watching me with curiosity. Henson twisted him back around as Iona approached and crouched in front of him again. Tell me who hired Venkalth to kill Jarek. She pressed the tip of the dagger beneath Eric's jaw. His eyes narrowed until she moved her wrist just a hair. Blood dripped from the tiny puncture wound. All right, it was me. I hired him. On whose orders? When he looked ready to keep resisting, Iona removed the dagger from his wrist and aimed it at his groin. Damn it, just stop. It was Mariana. She wants the throne. Why? What's her plan? Eric fiddled with his wrists, and his eyes darted away. Plan? There is no plan. Jarek's dead. That's it, he said, making Iona click her tongue. What? I'm telling you the truth. Mariana never does anything half-assed. What's the rest of her plan? I don't know. His sudden shout of pain cut off his words. He sucked in ragged breaths as I turned my back on the sight. Iona had rammed the dagger into his upper right thigh. I chanced a glance to see it still embedded there, as she reached for a new dagger and aimed it at his other thigh. Wait, just wait, Eric pleaded, but she plunged it home in his left thigh. He shouted until Henson clapped a hand over his mouth, stifling the noise. I ran a hand down my face, not believing this was what I'd come out here to help her do. Torture someone. My stomach twisted in knots. This went against all my teachings as a healer, as a part of my guild. Now, Iona said, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look. You're going to tell me what she's planning, or you're going to start losing body parts. What is her plan? I muttered under my breath for him to just answer. When it took too long, I spun around. Answer her, damn it. Iona gave me a curious glance. Eric, on the other hand, hung his head. She never thought Jarek made a good king, he whispered. She's been riling up the radicals for over a year now. He licked his lips, shuddering from the agony caused by his wounds. When her first attempt to kill him failed, she planned another way. First attempt? Henson asked, confused. What first attempt? But it was Iona who answered. The motorcade attack. She was behind it. You put a stop to her plans that day, so she decided to go a different route. Then when she realized Jarek had become infatuated with you, she came up with something even better. Eric scoffed, even as Henson warned him to shut it. He actually thought the people would accept you as his queen. If Mariana didn't take control of the kingdom, there'd be only chaos. Revolts left and right. She did what was necessary. Iona's hands curled into fists as she straightened and turned her back to Eric. I couldn't tell what was going through her mind. Infatuated with me. Is that what she thought? She finally uttered. What else could it be? Eric spat blood on the dirt near her boots. What fi would ever fall in love with a half-bred bitch like you? The last word was barely out of his mouth when she attacked him. She slashed her claws down his face, drawing rivulets of blood. He shouted and threw himself away from her, but Henson was there to block him. She wrapped her hand around his throat, digging the sharp points of her claws into his skin. Henson moved out of the way, and she slammed Eric into the ground hard enough to make his head bounce. The rest of her plan, what is it? She shouted in his face. When he didn't answer right away, she bashed his head into the ground again. Tell me. Rayson. She's going to marry Prince Rayson, Eric said with a grunt. Prince Rayson from Jolian? Why? Iona demanded. Eric took too long to answer, and she punched him in the face. Why? War. She wants war. They're going to marry, then take over the throne of Jolian. Eric's head fell to the ground and his eyes slipped shut. They're going to enslave all the worthless goblins in both kingdoms and turn them into an army to take out the Light Fi. That's what she's after. Iona slowly stood and stepped away from Eric's prone body as he continued to sputter and curse. Then I guess I have to kill Mariana. What? You can't, I exclaimed. How are you going to get to her? I was King Jarek's head guard for a very long time. I know every single way in and out of that damned mansion, she told me calmly, probably already seeing it all in her mind's eye. We can't let her go through with this plan. Even you have to agree with that, she shot at me. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Did I want to see all goblins enslaved and used as soldiers? Of course not, but this was insane. She wouldn't be able to get to Mariana. There had to be another way to stop it. If we could get to the council, tell them what we knew, or make Eric confess the truth, then maybe. No. Eric shouted. Iona had produced another dagger. She drove the blade into his neck, pinning him to the dirt. He gasped and gagged on his blood. His body twitched until finally he stopped moving. His eyes were frozen open in death. She tore the dagger free and wiped the blood on her pants. Henson, you with me on this? To avenge Jarek's death and see your name cleared? Hell yes. What do you want me to do? Jarek's funeral. Has it happened yet? Henson glanced toward the sky. No, it's planned for tomorrow at midday. Which means most of the royal grounds will be bustling with activity for the procession, the burial, and the memorial dinner afterward, Iona mused. We'll have to move quickly. Get her before the procession. That's when the royal grounds will be most vulnerable. I can ensure you a way in. That's all I'll need. Just wait a damn second, I yelled. They looked at me like I might go insane at any second. To be fair, I felt like I was. I thought I was doing the right thing, saving Iona's life. Now, I found myself dragged into the middle of a mess with killers and backstabbing plots and monarchs wanting to start wars. You can't do this. It won't solve anything. It'll stop Mariana from marrying Rayson. It's all I need, Iona replied. And if she's dead, who's going to clear your name? You just murdered one of the few people who knew the truth. I motioned to Eric's dead body. Then Kalth knows. Why not just have Henson go to the council and bring them here? Or somewhere, I added, glancing at Eric's dead body. They'll have to believe you. There's no reason for you to have killed Jarek. Except half the council, if not more, are most likely in on the plan with Mariana. She rested a heavy hand on my shoulder and squeezed. I understand this is difficult for you, but this is what I have to do to avenge Jarek. You mean to save the kingdom, I said, and she removed her hand. You're doing this for the goblins. For everyone. Not just vengeance. Right. If it makes you feel better, sure, we'll go with that. The way she wouldn't meet my gaze suddenly had the gears turning in my mind. Henson's face was set in a scowl as he looked to Iona. My heart plummeted as the truth hit me. You're planning on dying, aren't you? She didn't answer. She walked away from me. No, I'm not going to let you do this, not after everything you've been through, I yelled as I followed her. You survived one of the harshest known poisons to our kind, Iona. You are more than just Jarek's head bodyguard. I'm what, huh? She snapped as she stopped short, and I almost ran into her. I'm a shining beacon of hope for goblins everywhere. Is that what you're saying? You could be. She laughed harshly. No, I'm a killer, Aiden, and it's time you accept that. You heal. I kill. That's how it works. No grand speech from you is going to change who I am. So you're just going to murder Mariana? She shrugged. And whoever else gets in my way. No. I won't let you do this. You're not the monster they're claiming you to be. I grabbed her arm to stop her, but she easily pried it off and twisted my arm. I yelped, and she loosened her grip. You know nothing about me, she whispered, her lip twitching in her agitation. Go back to Timber Falls, Aiden. Go back to the goblins. They need you more than they need me. That's not true. "Why do you care so much about my life?" she asked. "Why did you risk yourself to save me?" Did I tell her how I'd been seeing King Jarek around, and he essentially made me swear to look out for her? She was already unstable. Saying I saw the image of the Phi she loved might send her over the edge. Or she wouldn't believe me. Then she'd deck me. I gave up and simply said, "Because that is my job." Her intense stare said she didn't believe me. She walked away and I snagged her arm. I tried to tell her again not to go when she punched me. I saw stars, thought I heard her apologize, and then she hit me again. I came to with a pounding headache. Sunlight poured through the branches, swaying gently over my truck. My truck. How had I gotten in here? The blanket I usually kept tucked under the seats was draped over me, like someone had placed me in here. I sat up too fast and gasped as the pain intensified behind my eyes. Iona's fist coming toward my face filled my mind. She had punched me hard. "Damned woman," I mumbled, fumbling for the truck door and practically fell out. The night's events came back to me in a rush. Watching as Iona and Henson tortured Eric. Then she'd killed him. I hurried to the front of the truck, but there was no body left behind. The blood had been washed away too, like they'd never been here at all. Worse, Henson's vehicle was missing, and there was no sign of Iona. She was off to kill Mariana. I kicked the truck, then instantly regretted it. Hobbling on one foot, I made it to the center of the clearing. I stopped inside. If she wanted to kill Mariana, and who knew how many others, and get herself killed in the process, that was on her. I was a healer. I didn't kill people. I didn't want vengeance. I needed to get to Orion and warn him of what was to come if Iona failed. She should be the one doing it, not me, I muttered to the woods. But no, now she has a death wish. That's great, just freaking great. Not like I would have been of any help if I'd tagged along. I weighed my options and decided there was nothing more I could do here. As I made for my truck, a cool wind gusted past me. I kept walking, trying to work on a plan to get the goblins out of Charus and to one of the Light Phi kingdoms. They'd be safe there from Mariana, for a while at least. I was at the truck about to climb in, when a figure appeared next to mine in the glass. I jumped as I spun and came face to face with Jarek's spirit. "Really?" I yelled. Jarek's frown deepened, and he crossed his arms over his chest. His form was misty around the edges, but the rest of him looked fairly solid. "What do you expect me to do? Go after her?" His brow rose, and he glanced in the direction Iona had gone. "I'm a healer," I said loudly, emphasizing each word. "What help could I possibly be to her?" His arms fell to his sides, and he came closer. I wasn't sure what he was going to do, but then his hand rested against my forehead. My eyes slipped closed as I was assaulted by a whirlwind of memories. They swarmed around me, bombarding me with emotions that weren't my own. I saw the day Iona saved Jarek when his motorcade was attacked. I felt his growing admiration for this half-goblin as he had dinner with her, confided in her, and found a friend. The memories shifted as they became so much more. Then I saw the night he was killed. Iona had told me about it, but reliving it from Jarek's eyes, seeing how he died and why he died tore me apart. I sank to my knees in the dirt as Jarek's pain became my own. He'd saved the woman he loved from Venkalth. As he removed his hand and the clearing came back into view, I understood it was my duty now to save Iona from herself. Holding a hand to my chest, feeling a ghost of Jarek's stab wound, I muttered, "Why me? Why not that Henson guy or anyone else? I'm not a fighter." He nodded slowly, as if that answered my question. I rubbed the sore spot on my chest and clambered to my feet. "That's why you think I'll be good for her," I said. "And if you're wrong, you know she can easily kick my ass. Or kill me." He shrugged, as if that was a risk he was willing to take. "If we both end up dead, you can't blame me in the afterlife." Now I had to go after Iona, with no sure way of how to find her. If she was already inside, I was screwed. I climbed into the truck and started the engine. As I threw it into drive, Jarek's spirit materialized in the passenger seat. "You sure you want to tag along? Or I don't know, why don't you just go and tell her you don't want her to do this?" He raised his brow and motioned for me to get moving. "Fine, but I'm damn sure she'd listen to you over me." Jarek shimmered out of view as I left the clearing behind and took a dirt road that wound through the trees. I'd hit the main road in about an hour. That seemed too long. I pushed the accelerator to the floorboard, and by the time I reached the blacktop, I was hitting 70. I'd have to park out of sight. With it being Jarek's funeral, they'd have the royal grounds crawling with guards. I might manage to get inside using my healer credentials, but only if Venkalf didn't spot me. Or the guard from Timber Falls. Or the other ones who came to my cabin. "I'm going to die," I mumbled to myself. A touch landed on my shoulder, then was gone again. I was doing this for Jarek, though part of me still didn't understand why. He had nothing to worry about, after all. He was already dead.
Chapter 11. Iona. Getting to the royal grounds had been easier than I expected. When Henson and I arrived a couple of hours before noon, he headed inside to start his shift. I hung around on the outskirts of the grounds until there was enough for commotion for me to slip in through one of the side gates. Only servants and guards used it. They hadn't even stopped me or asked for my credentials. I'd kept the hood up on the jacket Henson loaned me. I had expected them to stop and check every person who came close to the mansion. They might not have done it at the gates, but they covered every single door inside. 4 guards were posted at the front, the back, and both side entrances. Luckily for me, I didn't have to use one of those. Once I broke from the crowd I'd used as cover to get through the outer perimeter gate, I casually made my way to the garage. The trucks, SUVs, and sedans we used for travel were lined up in neat rows. Only a few were missing in preparation for the funeral procession. It would lead from the front gates of the royal grounds to the cemetery on the other side of the Capitol. There, Jarek's body would be laid to rest in the family tomb. My heart seized and my steps faltered. "Keep it together," I muttered to myself. "You can mourn afterward." Several guards entered the garage, but it was easy enough to stay out of sight. Once they were gone, I crept around the vehicles until I reached an old rundown black and gray truck. It had been parked in the far right corner of the garage for as long as I could remember. I'd asked about it once, and several of the older guards had laughed. When the day came I was to be the head of Jarek's personal guard, I was finally shown what was behind the truck that never seemed to move. There was a steel door that blended into the surrounding metal walls. There was nothing to indicate there was even a door there, unless you knew about it. The locks were all on the other side, and could only be unlocked by someone with the correct key and PIN number. As I leaned against the door, I worried that Henson hadn't been able to get to it yet. If I hung around the garage too long, someone would find me. I gave the door another push, and it grated against the concrete floor as it opened. I slipped through the narrowest crack possible, then shut it behind me. Henson had left the key hanging on the keypad. I quickly locked it and tucked the key back in my pocket. If everything went according to plan, this would be my exit. The walk from the garage through the underground tunnel would take exactly 5 minutes. It was more time I had to worry about how I'd left Aiden. Knocking him out seemed like the only way to keep him safe. He wasn't made to deal with the dark side of our people. I was. If he was smart, he'd head back to Orion and go into hiding with the other goblins. I didn't want him worrying about me, or thinking I was his responsibility. He'd been right though. If this mission started to go south, if I didn't think I could get out of this mansion alive, I was more than ready to die. As long as Mariana and Venkalf were dead, of course. This whole time, I kept expecting to hear Jarek inside my head again or to feel his presence. I was alone though. It was just me, and it was better this way. I had probably just been summoning his voice to comfort myself with his loss. When I reached the end of the tunnel, I pressed my ear to the wooden door that only appeared as a door on this side. In the mansion, this entrance came out behind a large painting of Jarek's parents that resided on the first floor. It was off the main hall, and was usually void of too many people. Voices floated by, and I waited for them to depart. I stayed hidden until I counted off 60 seconds with no sounds. I pulled the latch near the top right of the door, and opened it carefully. The hallway was deserted. I wasted no time, and hurried onto the back stairs to the second floor. Mariana's rooms resided here, on at the opposite end from Jarek's. At the first landing, I ran into a guard. His eyes widened as he reached for his sidearm, his mouth already open on a yell. I grabbed for his comm first, yanking it free. My other hand closed around his on the gun, and I headbutted him. He fell back on the steps. I immediately disarmed him, then punched him in the face. He slumped over unconscious. I kicked his body down the steps back toward the rear hall, and shoved him inside a closet. After I removed the magazine from the gun, I tossed it in with the guard and closed the door. I never did like guns. They were too damned loud and too easy to rely on. It's how most guards got themselves killed. I took the stairs 2 at a time, and made it to the second floor without running into anyone else. As I turned the corner to head to Mariana's room, however, I came face to face with another guard. This one had his right arm in a sling and his face was bruised. It only took half a second for me to recognize him as the survivor from Timber Falls. "Miss me, Gary?" I asked, then spun around and kicked him in the face as he started to shout. My kick cut off the sound, and I punched him in the throat to stop him from yelling at all. He gasped, and I finished him with another solid hit to the face. He crashed to the floor. I dragged his body into a room off the hall, a room used for guests. Thankfully, there were no guests currently at the mansion. With Gary out of the way, I unsheathed my daggers and snuck down the hall to Mariana's bedroom door. I knocked and waited. When there was no answer, I knocked louder. I knew she was still here. There'd be no reason for any guard to patrol this floor otherwise. We always cleared the floor before any royal returned to their chambers. I opened the door and rushed in, ready to tell Mariana I knew what she was planning. Except the room was empty. Her things were gone, all of them. It was like she never lived here at all. I slammed the closet door shut as fury made my blood boil. Her brother wasn't even buried yet, and that traitorous witch had taken the king's chambers for her own. There was nowhere else for her to be. No longer thinking clearly, I charged out of Mariana's room into the hall. 3 guards were there, one of them holding up a pissed-off-looking Gary. All of them turned at the sound of the bedroom door crashing into the wall. "Iona, don't," Jarek's voice whispered through my mind. I rolled my shoulders and glared at the guards. It was too late to get out of here in one piece. If I was going down, I was damn sure Mariana was going down with me. The second Gary opened his mouth and shouted for them to grab me. I threw a dagger at his head. It hit home at the center of his forehead. The other guard dropped him and joined the charge for me. I grabbed a third dagger from my boot, and met the first guard with a kick to the chest. It threw him into his comrade, but the third guard made it to me. He aimed his gun at my head, and I swiped his arm to the side. The bullet struck the wall behind me. I stabbed him in the bicep, and he screamed as I twisted the dagger. I spun out the other way, knocked the gun from his hand, and ran my other dagger through his neck. As he clapped his hands to his neck to staunch the bleeding, I flipped the daggers over and used the hilts to fend off the attacks of the next 2 guards. They opted for daggers as well, and the blades jangled loudly in the hallway. Yelling sounded on the main floor. More guards would show up eventually. I didn't have time for this shit. After the fight yesterday, I was weakening fast. I bashed the hilts of my daggers into one Phi's face, but another managed to slash his blade down my back. I snarled as the tip of the blade tore through my flannel shirt and bit into my skin. He smirked, but I wiped it off his face a second later when I slammed my dagger under his chin. I kicked out the legs of the other guard, riding him down with my other dagger to his chest. "Intruder! Get upstairs," the order was shouted from the stairs. Grabbing my daggers, I sprinted down the hall to Jarek's chambers. I kicked open the door. Mariana screamed in alarm. I slammed it shut behind me and threw the bolt. "You! How dare you come back here?" she shouted. "You've just signed your death warrant." She was decked out in a black silk gown, her red hair pulled back, giving her a severe look. Her hands fisted at her side, yet she seemed unafraid of the killer standing in her bedroom. The guards banged on the door. They'd be through any second. I stalked toward her. "We both know what you did," I whispered harshly. "I've come to avenge your brother." "My brother? You think I had something to do with his death?" she asked, appalled, pressing a hand to her chest. "You can drop the act. You have anything you want to say before I kill you?" I waited for her to plead for her life. Or to stop looking at me with those eyes that said she was winning. The guards might come through that door and kill me, but not before I killed her. Van Kalth was still out there. It wasn't an ideal way to go out, but it'd have to do. Mariana sighed heavily and snapped her fingers. "I will never understand what my brother saw in you," she said as the door to the bedroom opened. "I believe you know my friend, Van Kalth." My hands tightened on the daggers as the bastard himself strode into the room. He wasn't alone. Held in his grasp, barely conscious, was Aiden. His face was beaten, his right eye swollen shut, and he favored his right side. What was he even doing here? How had he gotten inside? It didn't change anything. I had Mariana and Van Kalth in front of me. I'd kill them. And if Aiden's life was forfeit with mine, then so be it. "You don't mean that," Jarek whispered, and this time I felt him standing right behind me. "You can't let him die, Iona. That's not who you are." Aiden tried to speak, but Van Kalth placed a dagger at his throat. An image of Jarek dying flashed before my eyes. I took a step forward, as if I could stop it. Van Kalth clicked his tongue. "I'd stay put if I were you. Don't want to get someone else killed now, do you? You think you can kill me? Your poison didn't even do the trick." Van Kalth sneered. "Yes, and I'm certain I have this healer to thank for that. Don't worry. He won't be able to save you a second time." I tried to take another step, but this time when Van Kalth threatened Aiden with the blade, blood appeared on its tip. I froze and held up my hands. "What do you want?" "Oh, I think that'd be quite obvious," Mariana mused. "Turn yourself in and your friend here goes free." "Right, because I'd believe you." She shrugged. "You're right. We'd kill him after we killed you, but alas, I can't have traitors running amok when I take the throne now, can I? It'll never happen. I won't let it. My dear Iona, you don't get a say in the matter. You're going to be dead." Why had Aiden done this? I'd had a plan, one that might have ended in my death, but it was a plan that would have avenged Jarek's death and saved the kingdom from a terrible fate. Why had he shown up? To stop me? I was furious with him. As much as I told myself I was fine with his death, the thought of seeing Aiden dead at the hands of Van Kalth sent an uncomfortable shiver down my spine. It wasn't just because he'd saved my life. No, this came from something else I couldn't quite explain. I hated him for it. Hated him for getting himself in the same damn situation Jarek had been in. This time I wasn't going to watch him die. Hoping he realized what this cost me, I winked at Aiden. His good eye widened as he subtly shook his head. Too damn late. He got his ass here, and I was going to get us both out alive. My revenge would just have to wait for another day. "Well? What's your answer?" "I don't have all day," Mariana complained. "There's a funeral to get to, and then of course the dinner afterward. Did you know Prince Rayson will be there? He was terribly saddened at the news of Jarek's murder at your hands." "Just dreadful," he said. "Enjoy your life while you can, princess," I said, aiming a dagger at her. "Death will come for you, and I'll be the one who guides it right to your cold, rotten heart. One day maybe, but I plan on wearing the crown for a very long time before that happens." While she went on more and more about her rule, I watched Van Kalth closely. His eyes hadn't left me, and his grip on Aiden seemed to tighten. Timing would be everything. I'd worked out a plan with Henson on the off chance I killed Mariana and wasn't caught. We needed a way for him to know there was a body to be found. And I couldn't be standing anywhere near it. He'd brought me an old comm this morning, and had it set to only a channel he and I would hear. There were 2 code words Henson and I had used while we worked together. We simply changed the meaning for this particular mission. The first word, Reaper, would mean I was successful, and the target was dead. The second word meant I needed a diversion. Mariana paused, realizing Venkalth and I were having a stare down instead of listening to her. I smirked. Your Grace, I said. Are you speaking to me? Mariana asked with a confused glance at Venkalth. The assassin, on the other hand, started to laugh. Oh, you are good, aren't you? What are you talking about? Mariana demanded. What's happening? We both ignored her. Henson's voice came through the comm, Roger. 5 seconds and counting. Brace yourself. As Henson counted down, I dropped my daggers to the floor. Aiden frowned as Venkalth loosened his grip on his arm. The dagger came away from his throat. I knew what he was planning to do. He was going to kill Aiden. Just as Henson reached one, I leapt across the room, hands outstretched for Aiden. Venkalth moved to stab me as I struck the healer. The mansion shook violently in sync with the sound of a mighty explosion. It tossed Venkalth and Mariana clear across the room. Aiden and I hit the floor. I rolled and yanked him up with me. Can you run? I shouted, already making for the bedroom and the passage that led from Jarek's chambers to a secret set of stairs, then straight outside. Aiden nodded, but whatever he said was cut off by a second explosion. With the guards on high alert, the armory had been wide open, so they would have easy access to weapons in a hurry. No one probably paid any attention to Henson as he waltzed in, and waltzed right back out with a bag full of grenades. I shoved Aiden ahead of me into Jarek's room, then guided him toward the bed. I pressed the knob on the headboard, and the wall to the right swung inward. The moment we were through, Venkalth appeared in the doorway to the bedroom. He shouted my name, but I sealed the passage behind me. On the south lawn, Henson informed me. Black truck with the silver stripe. Copy? I grabbed Aiden's shoulder to steady him as another explosion thundered through the mansion. Once we hit the ground floor, we sprinted along the short tunnel to another door that led directly outside. Using the key I'd tucked in my pocket earlier, I unlocked it and punched in the code on the keypad. The light above the door turned green, and we were out, running into the late morning sun. Move it. Henson sat in the driver's seat of the pickup. Behind us was complete chaos. Guards shouted and there were sirens blaring. The air was thick with acrid smoke. I threw Aiden into the backseat of the truck, then sprinted around to hop in the passenger door. Henson took off, maneuvering us across the south lawn to the rear gate. I ducked down low and yelled for Aiden to do the same. There was no one to try and stop us as we raced away from the mansion. I looked in the side mirror. The mansion was in flames. Iona, thank you, Aiden said. I whirled around to glare at him. What the hell were you thinking? Why did you come after me? Were you trying to get yourself killed? I blinked a couple of times, then added, how did you even get inside? He lifted his chin and nailed me with a glare of his own. I'm not as helpless as you think. Never said you were helpless. I told you not to stop me. I told you to stay away if you couldn't handle it. Can you handle it? He shot back. Why do you think I went there? You went there to die. Don't deny it. I turned back around. The urge to knock Aiden out again was strong, but I resisted. Henson's lips twitched as if he was fighting back a smile. Then he caught my furious glower and coughed. I'm going to assume Mariana and Venkalth are still alive? Henson asked. Yes. No thanks to our friend back there. I can hear you, Aiden mumbled. Why didn't you just let him kill me if you wanted vengeance so badly? I ground my teeth and didn't answer. What was I going to say? I heard the voice of my dead king inside my head telling me to save his sorry ass. Adrian would think it was residual symptoms from the poison. For all I knew, it was. Henson started to head for the outskirts of the capital. I shook my head. No. We can't stay here. I know a place, I told him. Trust me. He grunted but took my directions. I heard Aiden shifting around in the back seat like he couldn't get comfortable. Good. I didn't want him comfortable. This was all his damn fault. Now Mariana was still alive, and she was free to marry Prince Rayson. Why had Jarek wanted me to save Aiden? What good was a healer going to do me, except get us all killed? I hope you know what you're doing, I thought to Jarek. Otherwise, we're going to end up at war and then dead.
Chapter 12. Aiden. I wasn't sure exactly what happened back at the mansion. I managed to get onto the grounds without any trouble. Finding a way inside had been easy too, almost like someone was making the guards turn an eye away from me. I walked right through the front doors like the guards weren't even there. Once inside, I'd wandered around waiting for Iona to show herself. I'd felt Jarek's presence beside me until I reached the second floor. He'd been pointing me toward his study when suddenly he popped out of sight with a pained look on his face. Not wanting to be caught out in the open, I ducked into his study and ended up standing right in front of Venkalth. There'd been no chance to run. He'd taken in delight in seeing how much pain I could take while he grilled me about Iona. I hadn't told her all this yet, including the part about not giving up any information. Then Mariana had joined him, and they realized that sooner or later Iona would show up, and they could use me as leverage or bait. I tried to get free, and all that got me was a swollen eye. Now Iona, Henson, and I stood on a ridge overlooking the cemetery. We were too high up to see much, but I could just make out the top of the royal tomb where Jarek would be laid to rest. We can't stay long, Henson told Iona quietly. I know. I just had to come here once. Not like I'll be able to visit him at his grave. I'm a wanted woman still. She glared at me over her shoulder as she said it. I'm not apologizing again, I said, standing my ground. Killing them like that would have damaged you. She laughed darkly. I'm already damaged, Aiden. There's no antidote to fix me. You can't let yourself turn into a monster. Can't I? How else do you fight monsters? How else do you stop evil from taking over? It's a destiny of destruction. That's my destiny. Being good was Jarek's destiny. It's what got him killed. I can't follow that path. I was destined to destruct. Some of the anger seemed to leave her with those last words. She planted her hands on her hips and stared up at the darkening sky. There's a storm coming, Aiden. It's going to be one of blood and death. That's my path. It's a path of exile. If you can't handle it, then please find your way to somewhere safe. With Mariana alive and Venkalth at her side, the goblins aren't safe. No one is. She shut her eyes as the wind kicked up, rustling the leaves in the branches overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a flash of lightning lit the sky. The funeral for Jarek had clearly been postponed after the attack at the royal grounds. Iona was right. There'd be no coming back here for her. This was her goodbye. Her lips moved with words I couldn't hear. A single tear slipped from the corner of her eye. She hastily wiped it away, turned on her heel, and stormed for the truck. Henson nodded respectfully toward the cemetery, then followed. I lingered a few seconds longer. I hadn't sensed Jarek at all, but now as cold raindrops pattered my face he appeared. I said nothing, and all he did was look toward the truck and Iona. I had no way of knowing what was going to come next. Iona's assurance of blood, death, and destruction on the horizon weighed heavy on my shoulders. The fate of Charuz and all the goblins within her borders were now in Iona's hands and mine, if I joined her. Damn it, I whispered to the storm and walked away from the ridge. I felt Jarek walk with me a few more paces, and then he was gone. I'd never wanted practice healing during a time of war. Looked like my mostly peaceful life was about to change, and it was all because of a dead king and a stubborn, dangerous half-goblin. What could possibly go wrong?
Thank you for listening. This has been a Ciara Graves book. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of new releases.